I had not prepared for that sentence. He was sitting across from me in the study of his Harlem townhouse, in a leather chair the color of aged cognac, wearing a charcoal cashmere sweater with the sleeves pushed to his forearms. Not a suit. Not the boardroom armor I'd catalogued over 6 weeks of uneasy proximity. His reading glasses were still on his face, the wire-rimmed ones I'd seen twice before and categorized as inexplicably devastating, and a half-finished glass of red wine sat on the table beside him, catching the low amber light from the lamp. He looked like a man who had been reading before I arrived. He looked like a man who was perfectly comfortable with what he was about to ask of me. "Sit down, Naomi," he said, when I hadn't moved from the doorway. I sat. The chair he'd placed for me was closer to him than felt rational. Not intimate exactly. There was a small table between us, a candle burning low on it, a notepad and pen that I noticed with a lurch of something I refused to analyze. But the distance between us was calibrated. Everything Marcus did was calibrated. I was beginning to understand that. "You didn't answer," he said. "I'm thinking." "I know, I'm watching you think." He removed his glasses and set them on the arm of his chair, unhurried. "Take your time. This conversation doesn't start until you're ready for it." That should have relaxed me. It didn't. Because what I'd discovered over 6 weeks of being in rooms with Marcus Aldridge was that his patience was not passive. It was one of the most aggressive things about him. He waited the way a man waits, who has already decided the outcome. Not arrogantly, but with a deep, quiet certainty that unraveled me faster than pressure ever could. "The loss of control," I finally said. "That's what frightens me." He didn't react immediately. He picked up his wine, took a slow sip, set it back down, watching me. "That's the most common answer," he said. "It's also never the real one. Try again." Heat climbed the back of my neck. Not embarrassment, not quite. Something more specific. Something that spread from the base of my skull down between my shoulder blades and pooled there, warm and uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. "I don't know you well enough to be doing this," I said. "That's what frightens me." He tilted his head. 1 degree, barely. "Better," he said quietly, "but still not it." I pressed my palms flat against my thighs. My dress was navy silk, fitted through the waist, and I'd chosen it because it made me feel like myself. Naomi Clark. Tenured, composed, in possession of her own mind. Right now it felt like a costume. "What I'm afraid of," I said, and stopped. The candle between us shifted. A draft from somewhere, the old bones of this house settling maybe. And the flame stretched sideways and then straightened. And I watched it because I couldn't look at him while I said this. "I'm afraid that I want this more than I can currently justify wanting it. I'm afraid that this isn't academic for me the way I told myself it was. I'm afraid that you already know that, and that you've known it longer than I have." Silence. And then the thing that blindsided me so completely that I forgot, for a full 3 seconds, how to regulate my breathing. Marcus Aldridge set his wine glass down, leaned forward, and pressed both palms to his knees. And the expression that moved across his face was not the controlled, weighted calm I had catalogued and studied and braced myself against. It was something fractured, something naked. "I have known it longer," he said. "That's the thing I've been trying to decide whether to tell you." He exhaled through his nose, the smallest breach in his composure, the smallest crack in the wall, and looked at the candle instead of me. "I recognized what you wanted before you did, and I used that. I want you to know that I know I used it, and that somewhere between the first time you walked into my building and tonight, it stopped being strategy." The ground shifted. That is the only way I can describe it. Not metaphorically. I mean the specific physical sensation. A mild disorientation. A rearranging of the floor beneath my feet. Because the man I had been steeling myself against for 6 weeks had just handed me something I had not asked for and had no idea what to do with. He looked back at me. "That doesn't change what tonight is," he said. And the wall came back up but thinner now, and we both knew I'd seen behind it. I'm still going to lead this. I'm still going to take you to the edge of what you think you want, but you need to know that I'm not untouched by this either. I didn't speak for a long moment. I was too busy cataloging what was happening inside my own body, the way my pulse had moved, relocated from my chest to somewhere lower and more specific. The way the air in the room had changed texture. The way I was acutely, almost painfully aware of the exact distance between my me and his. "What do I call you tonight?" I asked. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but its predatory cousin. "Marcus," he said. "My name. I don't need a title to hold authority in a room." He picked up the notepad and pen from the table and held them out to me. "Write down 3 things you're curious about. Not what you've researched, not what you've read. What you are actually, specifically curious about. Things that live in the back of your mind when you're not thinking about them." My hand went to the pen before my brain had caught up to consenting. I wrote 3 things. My handwriting was steadier than I felt, which felt like a small, private lie. He took the notepad back without reading it immediately. Set it on the table, face down. "We'll get there," he said simply. "Not tonight. Tonight is simpler." "What is tonight?" He stood. He was not a large man in the way that the word large implies blunt force. He was long, precise, built like a man who moved through the world with intention in every limb. Dark brown skin that caught the lamplight in warm copper at his temples, at the backs of his hands. When he stood, the room reorganized itself around him, the way rooms do around people who have never once questioned their right to occupy space. He let 40 seconds pass. I counted them, which I knew was cheating, which was its own kind of not stillness. Then his hand came to rest at the top of my spine, one palm, flat and warm, between my shoulder blades, through the silk. Not moving, just there, present and deliberate and impossibly, infuriatingly calm. The heat that traveled down from that point of contact moved in 2 directions, up into the muscles of my neck and down the length of my back, and lower. And I felt it arrive somewhere that made my breath catch in a way that was specific and honest, and had absolutely nothing academic about it. "There," he said softly. "That, what you just felt." I didn't answer because I couldn't, without my voice betraying what the rest of me was already betraying. "That is the beginning," Marcus said. "Everything we do from here starts from exactly that moment." He removed his hand, stepped back, moved around to the front of my chair, and looked down at me. And his expression was composed and intent, and underneath that, something that matched what I felt, something neither of us had agreed to feel. "How do you feel?" he asked. I looked up at him and told the truth, because I'd promised him that at minimum. Like I've been dropped into the deep end of something I don't have a map for. "Good," he said, and the word landed warm and dangerous in the center of my chest. "Maps are for people who've already been where they're going." He picked up his wine glass, crossed back to his chair, and sat down like a man who had not just rearranged my interior geography with his palm and a single instruction. "We'll meet again Thursday," he said. "I want you to think about what it felt like to hold still. Not analyze it, not research it. Just carry it with you and see where it goes." I stood on legs that were steadier than they had any right to be, gathered my bag and walked to the door. "Naomi." I stopped, did not turn around. "What you wrote on that notepad," he said behind me, his voice low and even, and absolutely, surgically precise. I already knew. All 3. I walked out into the cold and did not breathe properly for an entire block. Because what terrified me most wasn't that he knew. It was that I'd wanted him to. Chapter 29, Falling Deeper. He was cooking. That was the thing I couldn't get past. Not for the first hour anyway. Damien Ashford, who wore silence like a second suit, and moved through every room as though he had already decided how it would end, was standing at the cabin's cast iron stove, in bare feet, his back to me, doing something careful and deliberate with a pan of onions. Bare feet. I hadn't known what his feet looked like until that moment. The weekend retreat had been his idea, or rather, it had arrived in my life the way most of his ideas did, as a fact I was expected to absorb. The cabin belonged to his family, he'd said, somewhere in the Blue Ridge foothills, 2 hours from the city, where the October air smelled like wet copper and pine, and the cell service dropped to nothing about a mile past the Iron Gate. I'd told myself I came because the alternative was another weekend in my apartment, rearranging the anxiety in my chest into something resembling productivity. I didn't tell myself the truth. I sat at the long kitchen table with a glass of red wine I hadn't touched yet, watching him. The onions were going translucent at the edges. He adjusted the flame the way a man adjusts something he genuinely cares about, not showing off the adjustment, not looking back to see if I'd noticed, just tending to it. There was a small pot to the left, and whatever was in it smelled like something my grandmother used to make on cold Sundays in Atlanta. Stock and bay leaves and the ghost of something sweet underneath. "You cook," I said. It was not a question. It was me trying to reorganize a man I thought I had partially figured out. "When it matters." He didn't turn around. "What makes tonight matter?" He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "You're here." The wine glass was cool against my fingers. I focused on that, the specific temperature of glass against the pad of my thumb, because the alternative was to feel what was happening lower, behind my sternum and below it, which was a pressure I didn't have a name for yet. I kept trying to call it nerves. The word kept refusing to fit. We ate at the table with the candles he'd lit. Not romantically, or not obviously romantically, just set into their holders and touched with a match, the same way he'd adjusted the flame, like someone who knew what a room needed without performing the knowing. The food was groundnut stew, rich and slow and layered in a way that surprised me. "Your grandmother's recipe?" I asked. He looked up. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly. More like the careful rearrangement of a man who has been seen doing something private. "My mother's. She learned it from hers. We called it Sunday pot." "Where did your mother grow up?" "Savannah, originally. Then everywhere. My father's work moved the family. She never complained about it. I used to think that was strength. Then I got older and started to wonder if it was something else." This was the first time he had volunteered anything unprompted. I felt the shift in the room, the way you feel weather change, a pressure differential, not visible, but real. I set my fork down slowly, so I wouldn't break whatever had cracked open in him. "What do you think it was?" I asked, quietly, "the way you speak near something fragile." Damien looked at me across the table. The candlelight did something specific to his skin, made the deep brown of it luminous, almost warm bronze at the planes of his cheekbones, with shadows pooling underneath that I wanted, suddenly and stupidly, to press my fingers into, just to feel whether they were real. "Survival," he said. "She survived my father the same way she survived everything, quietly, and without giving him the satisfaction of watching her break." The air between us changed again. "Your father wasn't kind to her," I said. "He was the kind of man who thought cruelty was discipline." He said it without heat, without performance. Just a fact he had been carrying for a long time, worn smooth by how often he'd turned it over. I spent 20 years making sure I understood the exact distance between those two things. Something unlocked in my chest. Not sympathy. Something rawer than that. Recognition. "My mother used to call it managing," I said. I hadn't planned to speak. The words came up on their own, like something surfacing from deep water. Whatever my father threw at her, the drinking, the disappearing, she called it managing, like it was logistics, like if she organized it correctly enough, it wouldn't be damage. I picked up my wine glass, put it back down. I learned the same thing from her. I am very good at calling damage by other names. Damien set his fork down. For a moment he just looked at me. Not the way he usually looked at me, with that specific, unsettling attention that felt like being mapped. This was different. This was something open in him, and the openness was more dangerous than any calculation he'd ever aimed at me. "What name are you calling it tonight?" he asked. The question landed in my body before my mind had a chance to intercept it. I felt it in the back of my knees first, a warmth that had no right being there, radiating upward in a slow, disorganizing wave. My breath did something I couldn't quite catch before it happened. "I don't know yet," I admitted. After dinner, we moved to the wide front porch because neither of us suggested it. We both just drifted there, drawn by the dark and the cold, and the specific October silence of a place with no city noise underneath it. Just wind moving through fir trees, and once, far off, something that might have been an owl. He stood at the railing. I stood 2 feet to his left, my hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea I was using as a heat source because the temperature had dropped and I'd underestimated it. I could see our breath, faint, when we spoke. "You've never done this before," he said. "Let someone in." "Neither have you." "No." Damien moved, not dramatically. He reached up and touched the side of my face. Just his hand, open, his palm against my cheek. And the warmth of him against the cold was so specific and so sudden that my entire nervous system reorganized itself around that single point of contact. The back of my knees again. That disorganizing wave, slower this time, more thorough. My cup of tea was in both my hands, and I held it tighter because I needed something to hold that was not him. "Wanting something that much," he said, very low, "is not the opposite of safe." "Then what is it?" "It's the beginning of honest." His thumb moved, just slightly, a small shift against my cheekbone, and I felt it everywhere it had no business being felt. I became aware of my own breathing in a way that was almost clinical, the specific catch at the top of each inhale, the way exhale was taking longer than it should, the way my body had decided, without consulting me, that being this close to him was a state it wanted to stay in. I hadn't been kissed. He hadn't moved to close the distance, and yet something had happened, was happening, that was more destabilizing than a kiss would have been, because a kiss I could have named and filed away. This I had no category for. His hand on my face in the cold dark, while he looked at me like I was something he had been patient about for a very long time. That landed differently. That landed in the parts of me I'd been telling for years were not relevant. "I don't know how to do this," I said. My voice was almost steady. Almost. "You're already doing it." He dropped his hand, stepped back, deliberately, giving me back the space. And this was the thing I didn't anticipate, the reversal I was completely unprepared for, that I didn't want it back. The 18 inches of cold air between us felt like an absence now. Like something had been there and was no longer there, and my body was registering the loss of it with an urgency that alarmed me. He had held the power from the moment I walked into his orbit. I understood that now only because, as he stepped back and put distance between us and watched me with that patient, open expression in the dark, I realized with cold clarity that the power had changed hands. He'd given it to me, without announcement, without making it a gesture. And I had no idea what to do with it, only that every nerve ending I had was suddenly awake and asking questions my mind had not yet agreed to answer. He looked at me for a long moment in the dark, and something in his expression was almost like a smile, except quieter and more serious than a smile. And then he said, "Go to sleep, Naomi. Tomorrow I'm going to ask you something you're not ready for tonight." He turned and went inside. I stood on the porch alone with the stars and the cold and the specific ache behind my sternum that I was still refusing to name. And I understood, with the slow sinking certainty of a woman who has been irrevocably changed by an evening she cannot yet fully account for, that sleep was not going to come easily, and that whatever he intended to ask me tomorrow was already, somehow, already answered. Chapter 30. Escalating Tensions. I have been lying to myself for 29 days. I know the exact number because I have been counting. Not the days, technically, but the moments. The the specific surgical moments when something inside me shifted, and I chose, deliberately, consciously, to look away from what the shift meant. 29 days of that particular brand of self-deception that requires more effort than honesty ever would. The kind that leaves you exhausted in ways sleep cannot touch. Tonight I am too tired to keep lying. The townhouse is quiet, in that particular way Manhattan gets quiet after 11. Not silent, never silent, but the noise retreats to something ambient and low, the city breathing rather than shouting. And standing at the window of the study he gave me use of, which was already a mistake I should have recognized as such. His spaces carry his scent, something dry and warm, with an undercurrent that I have decided, for sanity's sake, not to analyze further. Cedar, maybe, or the absence of apology. I've never met a man who smelled like the absence of apology before. I hear him before I see him. Not footsteps. He barely makes sound when he moves, which I find unreasonably irritating, but the change in air pressure when a door opens, the specific quality of the room rearranging itself around a new presence. You're still up? Not a question. Dorian Cole does not ask questions when he already knows the answers. It's one of 17 things about him that I find infuriating, and exactly 0 things about him that I find uninteresting. I'm working, I say, which is not entirely a lie. The files are open on the desk. I have looked at approximately 4 sentences in the last hour. You're standing at the window. People work at windows. People who are working look at their work. I turn then, because the alternative is letting him have the last word with my back to him, which feels like a concession of some kind I'm not prepared to make. He's in the doorway, with his jacket gone and his sleeves rolled to the elbow. And I always notice, the particular darkness of his forearms against the pale fabric. His skin is a deep, burnished brown, the color of good bourbon held to light, and I have caught myself thinking about that exact comparison at least 4 times this week, which tells me something about where my mind has been living without my permission. What do you want, Dorian? He considers this, not performing consideration, actually doing it, which is worse, because it means when he speaks, it will be precise. I came to tell you the morning meeting moved to 7. You could have texted. I could have. He doesn't move from the doorway, but you would have read it and not slept, and then been sharp and difficult at 7, which makes the meeting take 20 minutes longer than it needs to. I'm sharp and difficult regardless. You're sharp regardless, he says. The difficult is variable. Something about the way he separates those things, the way he refuses to let the insult and the compliment collapse into each other like most people let them, does something to the back of my throat. A specific tightening. Not emotion exactly, something more physical than that, and less classifiable. I'll set an alarm, I say. He nods, doesn't leave. The window is cold against my shoulder, where I've leaned back against the glass, and the contrast matters right now. Cold at my back, the room too warm from the radiator he refuses to turn down, and Dorian Cole standing 12 feet away, watching me with that expression that isn't quite readable, that I have been attempting to decode for 29 days without success. You've been avoiding the East Wing, he says. I go still. Not visibly, I hope, but inside, that particular stillness that is the body understanding something, the mind is half a second behind. I haven't been avoiding anything. Nadia. The way he says my name. This is the thing I am least equipped to handle. The specific, deliberate way he says my name when he is choosing to be direct. Like he has decided that the 2 syllables deserve weight, and he is going to give them all of it. Dia. Not wrong exactly, but slowed down. Weighted differently. Like he is tasting it rather than using it. Every single time he does it, something happens low in my body that I have been categorizing as anxiety. I know it is not anxiety. I've been busy, I say. You've been busy in every room in this building except the one where we were working 3 nights ago. When you asked me to show you how the restraints were rigged. The restraints, Yes, the vocabulary of his world, which I entered with the professional confidence of a woman who reads contracts for a living, and the emotional preparedness of someone who has never once in 31 years let herself want anything she wasn't certain she could survive wanting. 3 nights ago, I had asked to see the rigging system. Purely technical. I needed to understand the setup for the documentation I was compiling, the liability architecture, the consent protocols. All of it reasonable, all of it within scope. He had shown me. And somewhere between watching his hands move through the knots with a concentration that was almost tender, and the moment he looked up from the final cinch and caught me watching his hands and not the knots, something had cracked open that I do not know how to close. That was work, I say. You left in the middle of a sentence. I remembered something I had to. Nadia. Again. The weight of it. Again. What did you feel? I stare at him. The radiator ticks. Somewhere below us the city breathes. That's not a professional question. No, he agrees. It isn't. He crosses the room then. Not quickly. Dorian does nothing quickly when he means it. Speed is for people who are uncertain, but with that deliberate, unhurried movement that I have learned means he has decided something. He stops 2 feet away, which is inside the radius that I have been subconsciously maintaining around him for 29 days, and I don't back up. I don't know if that's courage or the fact that the window is already at my back, and I refuse to let glass stop me from holding my ground. This close, I can see the fine detail of him, the small scar at his temple I've never asked about, the way his locks are bound back with something dark and simple, the unhurried patience in his expression that is never, not once, indifference. Dorian Cole is the least indifferent person I have ever been in a room with. Everything he does is chosen. I need you to answer me honestly, he says, not as my consultant, not in the capacity of any professional relationship we have. And if I don't want to answer you, then you say that, and I go back to my room, and we pretend this conversation happened differently. His eyes don't leave mine. They are very dark, very steady. But we both know what you felt. The problem, and I have had 29 days to understand that it is a problem, is that he is correct. What I felt, watching his hands move through those knots, a heaviness in my lower belly that was not fear. A specific warmth behind my sternum, spreading down, an awareness of my own wrists that I have never once in my life experienced before, like my skin had developed opinions about rope without consulting me, and something else underneath all of it, something I don't have the vocabulary for yet, a recognition, like a room I've never entered that I somehow knew the floor plan of. I felt. I stop. He waits. He is extraordinarily good at waiting. It is possibly the most destabilizing thing about him, and that is a long list. I felt like the ground moved, I say finally, because I am too tired to lie, and because the specific accuracy of that description feels safer than the alternative, the words I am not ready to say yet, the ones that would change the architecture of whatever this is between us. And then I felt like I needed to be somewhere the ground wasn't moving. Something shifts in his expression. Not surprise. He does not surprise easily. But something that might be satisfaction and might be relief and might be something more complicated than either. That's honest, he says. I specialize in it, occasionally. The silence between us now is different from the silence of 3 minutes ago. It has texture. It presses against my skin from the inside. He lifts his hand, and I do not flinch, but I am aware of every centimeter of air between his fingers and my face in a way that should not be physiologically possible, and he does not touch me. He stops with his hand beside my jaw, close enough that the warmth of him reaches me, and he waits. Not for permission. He has never needed permission from me for anything that wasn't mine to give. He waits because he is asking something without asking it. And he needs me to understand the question before he will accept the answer. I understand the question. The warmth of his palm a half-inch from my jaw is spreading down the back of my neck, down through my shoulders, doing something inexplicable and involuntary to my breathing. My lungs have apparently developed a position on his proximity, and it is deeply inconvenient. Dorian, I say. Tell me to stop, he says. Or tell me something true. The radiator ticks, the city breathes. I went back to the East Wing this afternoon, I say, when you were in meetings. I stood there for 11 minutes and I didn't touch anything, and then I left. His exhale is barely audible. His hand drops, not away from me, but to my shoulder. The very edge of it, the heel of his palm resting on the outer curve of my collarbone, and it is the smallest possible touch, and it goes through me like something structural has been rearranged. 11 minutes, he says. I counted. I know. His thumb moves once, just once, along the line of my collarbone, so slow it is almost not movement, and my body responds to it with a specificity that is almost embarrassing, warmth pooling somewhere low and distinct, my breath catching on absolutely nothing. What were you thinking about, those 11 minutes? He is looking at me the way he looks at things he has decided to understand completely. I look back at him, this man who smells like the absence of apology, this man whose hands know things I don't yet have language for, this man who has never once in 29 days let me pretend to be something smaller than what I am. I open my mouth to answer, and that is when his phone rings. He doesn't move. His thumb has stilled on my collarbone, but his hand remains, warm and deliberate and present. And he looks at me for 3 full seconds before he steps back and lifts the phone from his pocket and answers it. One word, his name, said with the same precision he gives to everything, and turns toward the door. At the threshold, he pauses. 7 o'clock, he says, without turning around. Sleep, Nadia. He leaves. I stand at the window for a long time after, one hand pressed to my own collarbone, where his thumb traced that single, unhurried line, as if I could measure what it left behind, as if the heat there were evidence of something I could catalog and contain. It is not containable. I understand that now. What I don't understand yet, what I will spend the next several hours in the dark not sleeping about, is that Dorian Cole stepped away from me tonight, not because the phone rang. He stepped away because I was 11 seconds from telling him the truth, and he wanted me to have to live with knowing that. Chapter 31, An Unexpected Encounter. Someone's been asking questions about the Hargrove account, and they used your name. I heard the words before I fully registered who said them, and for 3 full seconds I stood in the doorway of the Meridian Club's private reading room with a glass of sparkling water going warm in my hand, and the distinct feeling that the floor beneath my heels had quietly, politely decided to no longer exist. The woman who'd said it was already watching me when I looked up. Mid-50s, silver locks pinned back with the kind of precision that announces itself, wearing a linen blazer the color of aged cognac. She had the specific stillness of someone who spent decades in rooms where the wrong word could rearrange futures. I'm sorry, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to. I think you've confused me with someone. I haven't. She smiled, and the smile was not unkind. It was simply unmistakable in what it knew. Zara Beaumont, associate analyst, elevated to project lead 3 weeks ago. Unusually fast. And you've been attending private events with a man whose name isn't anywhere near the official record for why you were elevated. I should have walked out. I knew I should have walked out. My feet had other ideas. His name wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. I'd spent the last 6 weeks learning how a man like Callum Ashford occupies space. Not loudly, not with performance, but with the specific gravity of someone who has decided long ago exactly who he is and refuses to negotiate. I'd learned the way he reads a room, the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. I'd learned the one shallow line that appears beside his left eye, only his left, when something amuses him in a way he won't allow to become a smile. I had not learned how to protect either of us from a woman with silver locks and cognac linen and eyes that catalogued everything. My name is Edith Crane, she said, and gestured with one graceful hand to the leather chair across from her, as if she were the one hosting, and I were the one who'd been found out of place. I used to be Callum's godmother's attorney. Then I became something else entirely. I don't need you to be afraid of me, Zara. That would waste both our mornings. I sat down, not because I trusted her, because standing felt like surrender, and I needed to use the chair as a decision. I am choosing this. I am not being cornered. The distinction mattered to me. It was new, that distinction. 3 weeks ago, it wouldn't have occurred to me to name it. What do you want? I asked. She lifted her tea, took one measured sip, set it down with the specific care of someone performing patience. To warn you, she said. There are people, not enemies not yet, who are paying attention to a pattern. A man like Callum maintains a reputation through precision. What he keeps private, he keeps completely private. And yet, she tilted her head exactly 2 degrees. There's been a leak. Not from him. He doesn't leak. Which means the leak is somewhere adjacent to him. And you, my dear, are the most adjacent thing he's had in years. The water glass was still in my hand. I set it down before I could do something embarrassing with it. That's a very elegant way of telling me I'm a liability, I said. That's a very elegant way of hearing it, she said. And then, barely perceptibly, the corner of her mouth moved. He always did have taste in women who could translate. I didn't know what to do with that, so I filed it somewhere in my chest where it could sit and not immediately unsettle me. She asked me 3 questions. She asked them the way a locksmith works. Not forcing, not breaking, just finding the specific angle at which a tumbler gives. She asked whether I'd attended a particular fundraiser at the Ashford estate in September. She asked whether I'd seen any documents related to the Hargrove Offshore Trust. She asked finally, in a voice that dropped a register and went very, very careful, whether I understood what I'd entered. Whether I understood what I'd entered. The question sat on the table between us like something with a pulse. Define entered, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she laughed. A real one, not polished, not architectural. A laugh that came from somewhere older in her than her attorney posture. Oh, you're going to be interesting, she said, almost to herself. No, never mind. He's never what? She shook her head with the finality of a closed door. He'll tell you or he won't. That's not mine to carry. I left the reading room 7 minutes later. I walked to the end of the hall, pushed through the heavy door to the Meridian Club's private terrace, and stood in the November air until the cold of it was specific. Not ambient, but precise, working into my collar and along my forearms and down the back of my wrists. And I let it do that because I needed something outside my own body to be real right now. Someone had used my name in connection with Callum's private financial architecture. Edith Crane, who was not quite an enemy and not quite an ally, knew about us. Knew enough to find me here, which meant she'd been watching my patterns, and I hadn't known I had patterns yet. I'd thought I was still too new to this life to have developed legible ones. I thought about telling him immediately, reaching for my phone, sending the word call me in the way I'd learned he preferred. No subject, no preamble, just the direct line, no decoration. I didn't reach for the phone. I stood there and I didn't reach for it. And what I noticed, cataloging it the way I'd only recently begun to catalog things in my own body, was that the reason I didn't reach for it was not fear of what he'd say. It was something else. I wanted to hold this for a few minutes longer. Not the threat, not Edith Crane and her cognac linen and her questions like locksmiths. I wanted to hold the feeling of being in a story that was too large for me, one that I kept discovering was larger than I'd assumed, like a room that reveals another door every time I think I found the last wall. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was the opposite of comfortable. But comfort, I was beginning to understand this, and it still surprised me every time, was not the same thing as what I wanted. They had seemed synonymous to me for most of my life. Comfort and want, as if desire was simply the pursuit of ease. I was 31 years old, and I was standing on a private terrace in November, discovering that I had been wrong about this for as long as I had been old enough to have a preference. I wanted the room with the extra door. I wanted the next wall. I wanted to keep finding out where this went. That was what I didn't have words for yet. My phone buzzed. Not a call, a message. One word, no punctuation in the specific way he used text like punctuation itself. Terrace. I turned around. He was already there. Not at the door, at the far end of the terrace, near the stone railing, hands in the pockets of his dark overcoat. And even from this distance I could read the quality of stillness in his body. It was not the stillness of waiting. It was the stillness of someone who had already processed every exit and decided, for the moment, not to use any of them. Callum Ashford was 6'2", deep brown skin with the specific warmth of a man who took his health seriously, close-cut hair with a precise fade that his arbor understood was architecture, not maintenance. He was 40. He looked 40 and not a day younger, and I meant that as a specific thing. He wore the decade in the straightness of his spine, in the consideration behind his eyes, in the way he looked at me right now, like he was reading something I'd written. "You already know," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer it like one. "Edith's been tracking the inquiry for 2 weeks," he said, walking toward me with that particular unhurried stride. I asked her to intercept before it reached anyone with less discretion. He stopped an arm's length from me. Not close, not far. The specific calculation of a man who understood exactly what proximity did, and chose it deliberately. "I should have told you she'd make contact." "Yes," I said. "You should have." Something shifted in his face. Not apology. He wasn't built for apology, not the reflex kind, but something adjacent. Recognition. The acknowledgement of an error from a man who didn't make many. "You're not angry," he said. "I'm something," I said. "I haven't named it yet." Dark humor, it turned out, arrived without warning in moments of high stakes, because the human brain is a strange instrument that reaches for absurdity when the alternative is simply falling apart. "She called you interesting," I said. "Your ex-godmother's attorney, who is apparently some kind of sphinx in cognac linen, said, and I quote, 'He's never,' and then refused to finish the sentence." He went very still. Then, "She said that," in those exact words. He turned to look out over the terrace railing, and the corner of his eye, the left one, only the left, did the thing that was not quite a smile and was more honest than one. "She's known me for 22 years, he said, "and she's never once finished a sentence she decided wasn't hers to finish." A pause. "She likes you." She interrogated me. "That's how she likes people." I heard myself laugh. Short, a little involuntary, with the specific texture of tension leaving through a crack I hadn't planned for. And that was when he looked back at me, and the laughter stopped. Not because he made it stop. Because of the way he was looking at me. Not hungry, not calculated, not any of the things I'd expected from this version of him. The version who knew I'd been questioned, who knew the walls of our secret were thinner than either of us had believed this morning. He was looking at me like I was something he was afraid of losing. I had never seen that on his face before. My body responded the way it did now, when I least expected it. Not a rush, not a flood, but a slow, specific heat that started somewhere at the base of my spine and moved deliberate as a decision, upward. I stood exactly where I was, and I didn't do anything, and somehow the not doing was louder than anything I could have said or reached for. He took one step closer. The cold air between us disappeared. "The inquiry is being contained," he said, and his voice had dropped to the register he used when the room had gone private. "But Zara?" His hand came up, not to my face, not to my arm. His fingertips brushed the inside of my wrist, the thin skin there, just once, and then his hand dropped back to his side. "They know your name now, which means we have to decide something." "What do we have to decide?" I asked, though my voice had done something in the last 3 seconds that I didn't entirely recognize. He looked at me for one long measured beat. "Whether we're still pretending," he said, "that there's a world in which you walk away from this." The wind moved through the terrace. Somewhere inside the club, a door closed, and the sound of it was very far away. I opened my mouth. He was already waiting for what I'd say next. And for the first time since I'd met him, I understood with absolute clarity that he didn't know either. That we were both of us, standing on a ledge neither of us had reached the edge of yet. And I hadn't decided whether I was going to reach for his hand or step back. When the terrace door opened behind me and a voice I didn't recognize said, "Mr. Ashford, I thought that was you." Chapter 32, The Shifting Power Dynamic. There is a memory I keep returning to, the way you return to a bruise with your thumb, not to hurt yourself, but to confirm the tenderness is still there. I was 11 years old, standing in my grandmother's kitchen in Atlanta while she pressed my hair. The hot comb moved in slow, deliberate passes, and the smell of royal crown grease and singed ends filled the whole room. She was telling me something about power. I remember the shape of the lesson, even if I've blurred the words. Something about how the woman who appears to yield is not always the woman who surrenders. Bowing your head is not the same as breaking it, she said. The comb sizzled. I sat perfectly still. I didn't understand her then. I understand her now. Standing in the center of Marcus Calloway's private study at 11:15 on a Thursday night, wearing a dress the color of red wine, and absolutely no idea how I got here. And I mean that in every way the phrase can hold. The study is not what I expected. I don't know what I expected. Something cold, maybe. Something that matched the version of him I'd constructed in my head during the car ride over. The controlled one. The one who speaks in complete sentences and looks at you like he's already 3 moves ahead. The one who unsettles me on purpose and then watches me recalibrate with something in his expression that I'm not ready to name. Instead, the room smells like sandalwood and old paper and something darker underneath, something warm. The shelves run floor to ceiling. There are books that have actually been read. I can tell by the way their spines crack slightly, by the sticky notes bleeding yellow from the pages. There's a trumpet on a stand in the corner that I didn't expect at all, its brass surface catching the low lamplight like a held breath. "You play?" I ask, because I need to put words in the space between us. The space is doing too much work as it is. Marcus doesn't look up from the decanter he's handling. His hands are deliberate in everything. I've noticed that. The way he pours, the way he sets things down with intention. No wasted motion. "Did," he says. Past tense. Why past tense? Now he looks up. The lamp throws one side of his face into amber and leaves the other in shadow, and the asymmetry of it does something to my equilibrium that I refuse to examine directly. His skin is deep brown and smooth across the high planes of his cheekbones, the kind of face that would read as severity if not for his mouth, which is full and currently arranged into something that is not quite a smile and not quite its absence. Because the thing I wanted to say with it, I found other ways to say. I should ask what that means. I don't. He crosses the room and hands me a glass. Our fingers don't touch. I'm absurdly aware of how close they don't touch. "Sit down, Nia." It's not a command. It's not quite a request. It exists in the no man's land between the two, and I'm beginning to understand that this is where Marcus Calloway lives, in the territory most people won't enter because they can't figure out the rules. I sit. The conversation starts where conversations always start when 2 people are trying to say something else entirely, in the abstract. He asks me about my work. I'm a restorations archivist. I spend my days with documents that have been damaged, figuring out what can be saved and what is already gone. He asks me what it takes to know the difference. "Pressure," I say. "You apply the right kind of pressure to the right place, and the material tells you what it can bear." Something shifts in his expression, barely, a fractional recalibration. And if you apply the wrong kind, then you lose more than you started with. He sets his glass down. "Are we still talking about paper?" I look at him directly. "I don't know what we're talking about." "Yes, you do." The specific accuracy of this stings, because he's right. I do know. I've known since the moment 3 weeks ago when he leaned across the conference table and said my name. My full name. Mia Adese Laurent, in a way that suggested he'd been practicing the weight of it, testing how it sat in his mouth before he spent it on me. I've known since then, and I've been building elaborate scaffolding around the knowing, making it hold a shape that felt more manageable. The scaffolding is not holding tonight. Here is where I should tell you what he said to me. The precise proposition, the careful, measured, psychologically sophisticated thing that a man like Marcus says when he wants to show you a door you didn't know was in the wall. I will not tell you yet, because that's not the part that broke me open. The part that broke me open was the moment before. He'd been walking me through something, an explanation, terms, the architecture of what he was describing, and I had been listening with the part of my brain that catalogs and organizes, the professional part, the part that handles things with precision instruments. And then he said, "Most people confuse submission with weakness because they've never had the experience of being held so completely that they didn't need to hold themselves." I went still. Not the polite, composed stillness I perform in professional settings. A different kind. The kind that starts somewhere at the base of my spine and moves outward. He watched me go still and did not look satisfied about it, which was the most disarming thing he could have done. He looked almost careful, like he understood the weight of what he'd just placed in my hands. "That's," I started. "Take your time." "I don't need more time, I stopped, laughed once, short and involuntary. "I need you to not be this reasonable about it, actually. It's making it very difficult to maintain a functional objection." The corner of his mouth moved. "What exactly are you objecting to?" "I'm working on it." "I'll wait." This man, this infuriating, dangerously patient man who pours whiskey like he's paying his respects to it, and has a brass trumpet in the corner of his study from a life I know nothing about, who sits across from me with absolute stillness and waits while I try to reconstruct the argument I came in here with. He's still waiting. There's no pressure in it. That's what destroys me, the complete absence of pressure. I spent so many years managing the pressure of other people's expectations that I built my entire sense of self around withstanding it. And now there's none, and I don't know what I am when there's nothing to push against. That's the moment. That's the specific, unnameable, ground-shifting moment. Not when he touched me. He hasn't touched me. That's the thing. That's what I cannot explain away with the rational machinery I usually run on. He has not touched me. He is 3 feet away, and the amber light is between us, and his hands are folded in his lap, perfectly still. And heat moves through me anyway. It starts at the backs of my knees, moves upward, spreads into the soft crease of my hips, settles low in my abdomen with a specific, deliberate weight. Not urgency, not yet, but something preparing itself for urgency. Something that has been waiting, apparently, for a considerable amount of time, and as decided tonight is when it stops waiting. "I've never," I begin, and stop, because the sentence is branching in 17 directions, and I don't know which one is true enough to say out loud. "You don't have to have," he says, like he can read the branch points. "This isn't a credential. You're very calm about this." I'm not. He holds my gaze. I'm choosing to be calm because one of us should be. Something catches in my throat. A specific small catch, like a thread snagged on a rough edge. Not fear. The thing that lives right next to fear and wears some of its same clothes. "What would it look like," I ask, "if I said yes?" "It would look like you telling me what you want. Tonight. Right now. Not what you think you should want. Not what you're afraid of wanting. What you actually want." The room is very quiet. Outside, somewhere below, the city is doing its regular city things. Distant sirens, a horn, the low-frequency hum of a million lives in motion. Up here, there's only the lamplight and the smell of sandalwood, and this man looking at me like my answer is the only thing in the room that matters. I think about my grandmother's kitchen. The hot comb. Bowing your head is not the same as breaking it. I think about 17 years of holding myself with both hands. Careful, methodical, never letting the material exceed what the structure could bear. I think about the trumpet in the corner, the thing he wanted to say, I put my glass down. I want to understand what you meant, I say, about being held so completely. I know what you want to understand. Then stop making me finish the sentence. I want you to finish the sentence. And there it is, the shift. The version of him that had been sitting quietly inside the measured, patient one, leaning forward now, barely perceptibly, the lamplight reorganizing across his face. Something has moved in the quality of his attention. It's still completely focused on me. It's just warmer and more precise. The way temperature and pressure can coexist and change the state of a thing entirely. I feel the backs of my knees again. I feel the space between my own ribs. I finish the sentence. I say the thing I have not said to anyone in the exact words it has always lived in before I talked myself out of it. Low, steady, watching his face as I hand it to him. He doesn't move immediately. He lets my words settle, lets them belong to the air in the room, irretrievable. Then he uncrosses his hands and leans forward with his elbows on his knees, closing the 3 feet of amber light between us by half, and says my name. Not my full name this time. Just Mia. Just 2 syllables, but in a register I have never once heard from another human being in 34 years of living. Like a door opening, like the hot comb lifting, and my grandmother's voice saying, "Now you understand." "Come here," he says. And what I feel, what moves through me from the backs of my knees to the crown of my head, is not fear. It is the terrifying, specific, irrevocable feeling of deciding. I stand up. I do not yet walk toward him. That half second, that held, trembling threshold between the decision and the act of it, is the most powerful I have ever felt in my life, and I have no framework for what that means about me. But I am going to find out. My foot lifts from the floor. Chapter 33. Under Pressure. You don't belong here. The words come from my aunt's mouth, but they land like something older, like a verdict that has been written about me since before I could read. She says it in her drawing room voice, measured, clipped, the kind of tone that makes cruelty sound like concern. And I am standing in the middle of her foyer, with my coat still on, the door not fully closed behind me, and I realize I have been ambushed. "Aunt Celestine, I spoke with your mother this morning." She sets her teacup down on the side table, the one inlaid with tortoiseshell that she has always kept positioned precisely 3 inches from the edge, and the small ceramic sound of it is somehow louder than anything else in the room. "She is worried about you. We both are. I know what this is. I have known since I saw her name on my phone this morning and chose, stupidly, to answer. I have known since she said, 'Come by, just for a moment. I have something for you from your mother.' And I told myself it would be brief, manageable, survivable. Nothing about this family has ever been brief, manageable, or survivable. Zara." Her voice sharpens. She wants my eyes. I give them to her, because I was raised to. Because 17 generations of women before me learned that you give Celestine Beaumont Hayes your eyes when she demands them, or you spend the next month being slowly unwoven. There are people talking. There are always people talking. Not like this. She smooths her hands across her lap, cashmere, deep plum, impeccable, and leans forward in the way she does when she wants you to feel the full architecture of her disappointment. He is not appropriate. The room tilts 2 degrees. I do not answer right away, because if I answer right away, I will say something I cannot take back. And I need to be careful. I am always careful. I have been careful my entire life, and it has gotten me exactly here, standing in my aunt's foyer with my coat on, being told that the only interesting thing that has happened to me in 29 years is not appropriate. "He is a private man," I say finally. "Whatever people think they know. Zara." Her voice drops low, almost gentle, which is when she is most dangerous. "I know who he is. I know what he has built. I am not questioning his accomplishments." The pause is surgical. "I am questioning what he wants with you." And there it is, the blade wrapped in concern. I leave before she finishes her second cup of tea. I do not slam the door. I close it with such deliberate, controlled quietness that I feel the restraint of it in my shoulders for the full 4 blocks I walk before I stop on a corner and breathe. The city is loud today. October loud. That particular friction of wind and traffic and people who all need to be somewhere else. I stand in it and let it press against me from all sides, and I think about what my aunt said, what he wants with you. And I feel something move inside me that is not quite anger and not quite grief. It is something else, something I have been not naming for 3 weeks. My phone vibrates. I look at it expecting nothing. I get his name. I'm at the studio. The studio is on the 14th floor of a building that doesn't advertise itself. No lobby art, no nameplate beyond a number. The elevator requires a key, which he gave me 11 days ago in a way that was completely casual. As if handing someone a key to a private elevator was nothing. As if I would simply have it now. As if, of course. I still have not put it on my regular keyring. It lives in the small inside pocket of my bag, where I keep things I haven't decided about yet. I use it. The doors open directly into the space, and the first thing I feel is warmth. The particular warmth of a room that has been lived in for hours, where someone has been present and working, and the air holds the memory of it. There are large canvases on 2 walls, his work in progress, the series he has told me almost nothing about. Because Marcus Cole tells you things in the order he decides you're ready for them, and not a moment before. I have come to find this infuriating. I have also come to find it, and I will not finish that thought. He's standing at the far end of the space, his back to me, a phone pressed to his ear. He doesn't turn when the elevator opens, but his shoulders change. A slight drop, a release of something. He knew it would be me. I set my bag down on the low bench by the entrance, the same bench where, 3 weeks ago, I sat for 2 hours watching him work without speaking, and somehow it was the least uncomfortable 2 hours I had spent in recent memory. And I wait. He says 3 words into the phone. I don't catch them. He ends the call. When he turns, the light from the north-facing windows catches the angles of his face, the way it always does in here. Warm gold against deep brown skin. And there is something in his expression I do not have a word for yet. It is not the version of him I saw on Tuesday, when he laughed at something I said so suddenly and completely that it startled me into laughing too. It is not the version from last Thursday, when he placed one hand between my shoulder blades in a crowded gallery and said nothing, and the heat of it went straight through my coat, through my dress, through 3 layers of careful composure. This is a 3rd version. Still. Alert. Something behind his eyes that looks like it has been waiting. How do you know that? Your cheeks. He crosses the room toward me, not quickly, never quickly. Marcus moves like someone who has made peace with the fact that space belongs to him. And when he stops, he is close enough that I can smell the work on him. Turpentine and something warmer underneath. And you walked fast. You're still deciding whether to be upset. I'm not upset. He looks at me. I'm something else, I say, because I have stopped lying to him. I'm not entirely sure when that happened. Tell me. The thing about the way he says that is the silence he puts around it. Tell me, from Marcus, is not a request for information. It is an invitation into a room you didn't know existed, and the door is open, and the light inside is different from any light you've stood in before, and you have a choice. I always have a choice. He has been consistent about this in ways that confuse and unsettle me, because I was prepared for something else, for the version of powerful men I had been warned about, and instead I got this. Someone who waits, who watches, who offers the door, and then steps back. My aunt, I say, she had things to say about you, about us. I pause, about what you want with me. Something shifts in his face, not anger, something more controlled than anger, something that is deciding whether to become anger. What does she think I want? She didn't specify. I look at the canvases behind him because it is easier than looking at him right now. She just made it clear that whatever it is, it's not right, not correct, not... I stop. not something she can approve of. Do you need her approval? The question lands flat and clean, no judgment attached to it. No, I say, and then, more honestly, I don't know. He is quiet for a moment. Then he moves, not toward me, which I expected, but away, toward the work table along the east wall, and he picks up something from among the scattered brushes and rags and reference prints. He turns and holds it out to me. It is the small glass paperweight I noticed on my first visit here, clear with a dark iron-colored center, a solid mass suspended inside clear glass. I asked him about it once, and he said only that it had been his grandmother's, that she kept it on her desk, that she said it was proof that hard things could be held inside beautiful things without destroying either. I hold it now. It is heavier than it looks. It always is. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your family, he says. He leans back against the work table and crosses his arms. And this is the thing that undoes me, quietly, every time. The way he holds space, without filling it with himself. But I'm going to tell you what I know. I wait. They see someone they don't understand, acquiring something they didn't give you, and that terrifies the kind of people who believe their permission is a form of love. He pauses. It isn't. The back of my knees go warm. It moves upward from there, slow and unreasonable, and I am holding his grandmother's paperweight and standing 14 floors above the city, and I am not equipped for this. Marcus. His name feels different in my mouth today, heavier, like the glass. I know, he says, quietly. He doesn't move. He doesn't come to me. He stands there, and he looks at me with that particular quality of attention that he has, that full, specific focus that makes me feel simultaneously seen and exposed and something else. Something I have no category for because no one has ever looked at me this way before. Like I am not a problem he is trying to solve. Like I am a language he is learning on purpose. I don't know what this is, I say. It comes out more honest than I intended, rough at the edges. You do, he says. You just haven't said it yet. The air between us has a texture. I am aware of it the way you become aware of temperature when it changes. Not a thought, a physical fact. He is 6 feet away, and I feel him everywhere, which is scientifically impossible and also completely true. The back of my knees, the inside of my wrists, the specific place on my collarbone where his eyes have briefly, precisely landed. I set the paperweight down on the bench beside my bed. I have no idea what I am doing. The pressure, I say carefully, isn't just from outside. He is very still. I know that too, he says, low, something in his voice that is new, not the command, not the gentleness, but something underneath both of them, something that sounds like effort, like restraint that has its own heat. I take one step toward him, not toward him, I am not that brave yet, but away from the door, away from the elevator, deeper into the space. It is the smallest movement I have ever made, and it costs me everything. His expression does not change, but something in the room does. Zara. My name in his mouth is a different kind of weight. He says the second syllable the way no one else says it, a fraction of a beat longer, as if he is keeping it. Don't move unless you know what you're deciding. And the ground shifts beneath me. Not metaphorically. I feel it in the balls of my feet, in the pit of my stomach, in that hot and bewildering place that I have not yet given a name to. The thing I have been calling something else. Because calling it what it is would mean I am a woman who wants things she has no experience wanting. And I am not ready. And I am already there. I don't know what I'm deciding, I tell him. Truthfully. Terribly. Yes, you do. I stand in the warmth of his grandmother's studio, and my aunt's voice is still somewhere at the back of my skull, and the city is still loud. 14 floors below, and Marcus Cole is looking at me like I am something that was always going to happen to him. And I think I am not going to survive knowing this man. I think surviving was never the point. They know, I say. They suspect. He stops walking and turns to face me. We are in a corridor that smells like hothouse orchids and old money. The lighting up here is designed to flatter marble, not people. And so his face is all shadow and structure, the architecture of him, not the warmth. There is a difference. Tell me the difference matters. He looks at me for a moment that is long enough to count. The difference is whether you walk back into that room with me or take the car alone. And there it is, laid on the floor between us, not dressed up. I think about Dr. Camille Okafor, the version of her who walked into this fundraiser 2 hours ago. Board member, cardiologist, serious woman. The one who told her sister last month that she had never been the kind of person who let things get complicated. That she kept her world clean, organized, hers. I think about what that woman would do right now. What are you willing to sacrifice? I ask him instead. Something shifts in his expression. Not softening exactly, more like opening. A door that wasn't there before. Ask me something harder, Augustine says. That was hard. No. He takes one step toward me, just one. The distance between us changes from professional to something that doesn't have a clean name. That was a question about logistics. I'm asking you what you're willing to lose. The orchid smell is doing something to my concentration. Or he is. I cannot separate the two. The board already, not the board. His voice doesn't rise, but something in it sharpens. I know what the board is. I'm asking about you, Camille. He says my name the way he said it the first night, with the emphasis landing one beat later than it should, like he decided at the last second not to say something else. Camille, a breath before the second syllable. What does Camille want to do? I want to tell him I don't have the answer to that question. I want to tell him I have spent the last 11 weeks mapping out every reason this should not exist, cataloging them the way I catalog risk factors in a patient file. Augustine Cole, 41, venture capital. The kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Also, the man who funded the hospital wing where I practice. The man who is technically on paper, through a chain of committees adjacent to a position of institutional oversight. The man who looked at me across a conference table in February and said nothing for 4 seconds that rearranged something in me I had not known was movable. I want to tell him I have all of that organized and indexed. Instead, what happens is this. He reaches up and adjusts the thin gold chain at my collarbone. Just the chain. Just his 2 fingers straightening something I hadn't known was crooked. And my body stops working. Not dramatically. Not visibly, I think. But from the inside, some circuit I didn't know was running goes quiet. And in the quiet, something else wakes up. It spreads from the base of my throat down through my chest and settles low in the region of my hips, which tighten involuntarily in a way I would describe clinically as a vascular response, and will not describe any other way, because I do not have the language for what it actually feels like, which is like something I have been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. He drops his hand. He says nothing. The silence is not a gap. It is a statement, a door held open. He's doing the thing he does, the thing that has been dismantling my carefully ordered world since February, where he does something that makes me feel seen in a frequency I didn't know I broadcast on. And then he waits. Not passively, he waits the way a question waits, with all of its weight forward. I take a breath and it comes out slightly wrong. Not broken, just uneven, like the first note of a song played in a room with unexpected acoustics. If I walk back in there with you, I say, there are people who will decide they know what that means. Yes, and you're comfortable with that. I'm asking if you are. No one has asked me that. Not my sister, who has been asking me instead what I'm thinking, with the particular emphasis that means she has already decided I am not thinking. Not the colleague who caught us in conversation at the January reception and went quiet in a way that lasted 3 days. Not the quiet voice in my own head that has been rerunning the chain of events. Every incidental meeting, every moment I could have redirected, and keeps arriving at the same moment in March when I could have said, I'll have my assistant follow up. And did not say that. Said instead, give me 20 minutes, and meant it. And went. Augustine waits. I look at him in this marble corridor, and I understand, suddenly and without ceremony, that there is no version of this conversation where I leave unchanged. Either I walk back in there and make the choice visible, wear it in my posture in front of 300 people and whoever that photographer was working for. Or I take the car alone and spend the drive telling myself I made the sensible decision, and know with the precision I apply to everything, that sensible is not the same as honest. My grandmother used to say, I begin, and then I stop, because I don't know what I'm doing reaching for her right now, except that she is the one person I knew who never sacrificed the truth of herself for the comfort of other people's expectations, who wore her silk on a Tuesday and her opinions on her face, and loved my grandfather with an uncomplicated ferocity that I watched as a child and thought was ordinary, and only understood as an adult was exceptionally rare. What did she say? Augustine asks, and his voice is different now, quiet in a different way. The edge is not gone, but it's not forward. It's present the way a held breath is present, restrained, waiting on something. She said the thing you don't choose always chooses for you, I say, eventually. He is still. And you believe her? I think about the fact that my body responded to a man adjusting a necklace as though he had said something I'd been desperate to hear for a year. I think I'm starting to, I say. Something happens to his face. I wouldn't call it relief. It's too complex for one word. It is relief threaded through with something darker and more urgent, which he contains, because he is very good at containment. This man who has spent 11 weeks not rushing me, not pushing me past the pace I've been able to bear, except in those moments when he pushes exactly enough to make me aware of what I'm refusing to name. He extends his arm, not grabbing, not a command, an offer that has enough confidence behind it to be almost unbearable, because it assumes I'll take it without being arrogant enough to take it for me. I look at his arm, the white shirt cuff, the dark skin of his wrist below it, deep, even-toned, the kind of brown that holds light differently than reflects it, absorbs it, keeps it. I have noticed this about him before, and chosen not to notice that I noticed. I loop my hand through the crook of his elbow. He covers my hand with his, once, briefly, with a pressure that says, I have you, without saying anything, and then we walk. The noise of the gala rises around us as we approach the main doors, and I am aware of how we look, the two of us, aware in my spine. I am 5'9" in these heels, and Augustine is 3 inches beyond that, and we walk like two people who have made a decision, because I have, and I feel the shift in the room before I see it. The way attention moves. The way a conversation stops and restarts with different furniture. Someone calls his name. A man, senator adjacent, with the handshake first energy of a man who has never once been uncertain of his welcome. Augustine stops, turns, smiles in the way that is precise and correct and costs him nothing. And then, small, deliberate, and quiet enough that only I will feel it, he presses his thumb once against the back of my hand. Steady. Not a question this time. A reminder that he is here. That this was chosen. That the ground shifting is not the same as the ground giving way. The senator reaches us and his eyes flick to me with the particular calibration of a man trying to determine what category to file me in. I look back at him without filing him anywhere at all. Dr. Okafor, Augustine says, and the way he introduces me. First, my title, my name, my field before his own, is not incidental, and I know it, and he knows I know it. Later there will be a photograph. Somewhere someone will caption it with speculation dressed as fact. My colleague will call. My sister will call louder. The board committee will convene and the word optics will appear in an email chain I haven't been copied on yet. Later. Right now I am standing in a room full of consequence with my hand on Augustine Cole's arm and his thumb pressed once against my knuckles like a sealed promise. And my body is doing something I cannot explain away. Something that lives below my sternum and behind my knees and in the particular unbearable awareness of everywhere he is and everywhere he isn't. And I understand, with the cold clarity I usually reserve for diagnosis, that I have already crossed a line I cannot see from here. The question that comes is not, can I go back? The question is whether I ever want to. I look at Augustine as the senator tops, and Augustine is looking at me. Not at the senator, at me, with an expression that says he already knows the answer, and has been patient enough to wait for me to catch up. I am terrified. I am terrified, and my hand has not moved. Chapter 35. Breaking Point. I have been lying to myself for exactly 34 days. I know the number because I started counting the morning after the Harrington Gala, when I stood in my bathroom at 4 a.m. with my hands braced against the cold edge of the sink, water running too hot over my wrists, telling myself that what I'd felt in that elevator, that specific, terrifying thing that had moved through me like a current finding its ground, nerves, altitude, the champagne, 34 mornings of that particular lie. And this morning, standing in the east corridor of the Whitmore estate, while the October light came through the leaded glass windows in long amber bars, while the sound of the string quartet tuning in the ballroom drifted up from 2 floors below, while every woman in a 50-foot radius performed the social calculus of being seen, I told myself the same lie one more time. And then Dominic Ashford walked into the room, and the lie turned to ash in my mouth. Here is what nobody tells you about desire. It doesn't announce itself politely. It doesn't knock. It finds the smallest crack in everything you thought was sealed, and moves in like weather. I noticed the exact moment. Not his entrance. I'd been watching the door for an hour without admitting I was watching the door, which is its own brand of self-betrayal. The moment was smaller than that. It was after he'd greeted the Whitmore patriarch, after he'd exchanged 3 sentences with Marcus Bellamy that made Marcus laugh in that reluctant way powerful men laugh when someone younger has outmaneuvered them without appearing to. After all of that theater, the moment was when he turned, and his eyes found mine across 30 feet of gilded room, and he didn't smile. He just looked at me, and something happened at the back of my knees. Not weakness. I want to be precise about this, because I've spent enough of my adult life dismissing my own physical experience as weakness when it was something else entirely. It was warmth, a specific, spreading warmth that moved from the backs of my knees upward along my thighs. And I was wearing a dress the color of dark wine, and I was suddenly very aware of the fabric against my skin. I looked away first. Of course I did. I have been looking away first for 34 days. Naomi. He said my name the way he always says it, with that slight elongation on the second syllable, like he has all the time in the world, like my name is something worth taking time with. It should not do what it does to me. I have heard my name 10,000 times, from my mother who shortened it, from colleagues who flatten it into a professional transaction, from old friends who sometimes still call me, know me like I'm 17. Dominic says it like he invented it. I turned. He was closer than I'd calculated. I am always miscalculating the distance between us, always surprised by how much space he occupies without trying. And I had to make a small adjustment with my spine, a subtle straightening, the kind of realignment the body makes when it suddenly needs to be taken seriously. Mr. Ashford, a beat. I wasn't certain you'd come. I wasn't certain either. His voice carried something different tonight. Not the clean authority I'd come to expect. Not the controlled warmth he deployed like a precision instrument. Something rougher at the edges. My mother called twice this morning, wanted to know if I'd be here, if I'd behave. The word behave landed oddly. I watched his face. And what did you tell her? That I always behave. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, the shadow of one, the ghost that haunts the place where a smile has been. I'm very good at behaving, Naomi, until I decide I'm not. The warmth moved from the backs of my knees to somewhere else, and I made myself hold his gaze, made myself not reach for a fresh glass of champagne just to have something to do with my hands. Here is what the room expected of me tonight: to be pleasant, to be Dr. Naomi Clark, the youngest woman to chair the Ashford Foundation's Arts Initiative, the daughter of Judge Elaine Clark, the woman who had earned every seat she'd ever occupied and therefore owed the room a particular kind of grace. To network, to smile the right amount, to go home at a reasonable hour to my immaculate apartment and my excellent playlists and my life which is good, which is genuinely good, which I have built with considerable intention and no small amount of sacrifice. The room expected nothing of me that involved Dominic Ashford and the specific way heat spreads when he uses my name. And here is what I expected of myself. The same. More even. Because I knew what he was. I knew what men like him want. The particular architecture of it. The way they see a woman who has built herself carefully and decide that the dismantling would be exquisite. I knew. I have always known. Knowing has not helped me at all. The debate started in the East Parlor, and it started as so many ugly things do, beautifully. Senator Whitmore's wife, a woman whose grace I had always admired and whose cruelty I had only recently begun to understand, made the opening observation that the Foundation's new community arts residency program was ambitious. She said ambitious, the way some people say delusional, with that specific tonal quality that means the word and its opposite simultaneously. The question, she continued, setting down her glass with a practiced delicacy, is whether certain communities have the infrastructure to support that level of investment. We don't want to set people up to fail. 3 people nodded. 2 didn't move at all, which meant they agreed but didn't want to be seen agreeing. One woman, Dr. Patricia Osei, brilliant and unhurried, raised an eyebrow a single millimeter, which, if you knew Patricia, was the equivalent of a standing ovation. I was already formulating my response. I had the data. I had the case studies. I had been preparing for exactly this conversation for 6 months, because men and women like Senator Whitmore's wife do not stop having it. They dress it in concern. They deliver it gently. They call it due diligence. But then Dominic spoke first. "What you mean," he said, and his voice was utterly even, the way the surface of very deep water is utterly even, is that you're not certain black artists deserve the same institutional support as white ones without first proving that they'll manage it responsibly. The room did not gasp. Rooms like this never gasp. But the silence that followed had the specific texture of a collective intake of breath that everyone was performing simultaneously and privately. Senator Whitmore's wife blinked. "That is absolutely not. The residency program will be funded in full," Dominic said. "The community infrastructure question was answered in the proposal I approved in September. I'd be happy to send it to you again." He smiled then, the full one, the one that arrived like it was doing you a favor. "Ambitious is exactly right, actually. I'm proud of that." He didn't look at me, but I felt with a certainty I couldn't explain that every word had been said in my direction. I found him on the terrace 20 minutes later. This is the lie I am still working on, that I found him, that it was coincidence, that I stepped outside because the room was warm, and not because some animal part of my brain had been tracking his location all evening with the quiet relentlessness of a tide. He was standing at the far end of the terrace, with his jacket off, draped over the iron railing, his back to the party, looking out over the Whitmore grounds, where the landscaping lights turned everything amber and theatrical. The October air carried the last edge of warmth before it would give up entirely. From inside, I could hear the string quartet playing something that had no business being as beautiful as it was. I stood beside him without speaking, not close, 3 feet of propriety between us, which is approximately 2 feet less than the distance I needed. He didn't turn. "You could have let me know you were coming." "You knew I was coming." A pause. "Yes." Then softer. "I did." I looked out at the same darkness he was looking at, and I thought, with sudden clarity, that this is what I have been afraid of. Not him exactly, not even desire exactly, but this, the specific gravity of standing next to someone who sees you. Not your accomplishments or your credentials or the careful architecture of who you have made yourself. You. That was brave, I said. What you did in there. He turned then. And this is the moment I will carry. Not the warmth at the back of my knees, not the 34 days, not even what came after. This moment. Because his face, when he turned, was not the face I'd expected. It was not composed or controlled or strategically warm. It was stripped of everything, just for a second. 3 seconds, long enough for me to see something in it that unmade several of my most careful assumptions about who he was. He looked tired. Not physically. Dominic Ashford has never, to my knowledge, looked physically tired. He looked tired the way old grief looks tired. Like something he had been carrying for a very long time had briefly gotten too heavy, and he had forgotten to hide it. My father used to sit at tables like that one, he said quietly. And he would never say the thing that needed saying. He had too much to lose. He was always protecting something. His jaw worked. I used to hate him for it. I should not have said the next thing. I knew this while I was saying it. And now? Now I understand what it costs to protect something. His eyes moved to my face, but I still can't do what he did. The distance between us was no longer 3 feet. I don't know when that changed. I don't know who moved. The physics of it felt less like decision and more like weather. 2 fronts meeting, the collision inevitable. His hand came up to my face. Not a caress, not a gesture of seduction or possession, just his fingers against my jaw, careful and honest, like he was checking to see if I was real, like he needed to know if I was real. And my body, my treasonous awakening body, leaned into it, a fraction of an inch, no more than that. But it was not nothing. It was the least nothing thing I have ever done. The warmth moved everywhere at once, and underneath it was something sharper and deeper, something I did not have a name for yet, something that felt like the answer to a question I hadn't realized I'd been asking for 34 mornings over a sink with the water too hot. This is a terrible idea, I said. Yes, he said. He did not move his hand. I have professional obligations, ethical considerations, the foundation, Naomi, my name, the second syllable, all that time in the world. I stopped talking. He leaned in close enough that I could feel the warmth of his skin, the specific temperature of him, and he said very quietly, against my temple, not a kiss, barely a breath, I am not going to ask you for anything you don't choose to give me, but I need you to know that I am done pretending I don't want it. The string quartet played something devastating from inside. I stood there in the October dark, with his hand against my jaw, and the ground entirely gone beneath my feet. And I thought, this is not nothing. This has never been nothing, and I don't know who I am going to be on the other side of knowing that. He stepped back, reclaimed his jacket from the railing with the unhurried elegance of a man who has learned to wait. His face, when he looked at me one last time before returning to the party, was composed again, but his hands, I noticed, were not entirely still. I stayed on the terrace for 7 minutes. I counted those 2. Then I went back inside, and I did not look for him immediately, and when I did look, he was across the room talking to Patricia O'Say and smiling at something she'd said. And he looked completely like himself, completely in command of every room he'd ever stood in. And I thought, he told me the truth out there. That was the truth. And the ground, which had been shifting for 34 days, finally finished moving. I just had no idea yet what it had moved into. Chapter 36, A Night of Reckoning. I have spent the last 4 years becoming very good at not wanting things. Not the way people say it when they mean they've learned patience or grace, or the particular brand of resigned peace that gets called wisdom once you're on the other side of 30. I mean I became architecturally good at it. I built rooms inside myself and locked them, filed the keys somewhere I told myself I'd forgotten, walked the hallways of my own life with the measured calm of a woman. He had decided, consciously, deliberately, without apology, that wanting was the most dangerous thing a person could do to themselves. I was fine with that. I had been fine with that. And then there is Marcus. And then there is tonight. The dinner party was Celestine's idea, which means it was curated within an inch of its life. The guest list balanced like a chemical equation, the lighting chosen to make everyone look like the best version of themselves. The conversation steered with the invisible hand of a woman who has turned social engineering into high art. I have known Celestine Beaumont for 11 years, and I still cannot decide if she is the most generous person I've ever met or the most strategic. Possibly both. Probably both. Those things are not mutually exclusive in a woman like her. I arrived late because I always arrive late when I am nervous, and I am almost never nervous. I was nervous. I had told myself it was the weather, that particular June humidity that settles over the city like something breathing. But standing at the door to Celestine's brownstone, feeling the sweat at the back of my knees before I even rang the bell, I knew it was not the weather. It was the possibility of him. He was already there. Of course he was. Marcus Ellington does not arrive late to anything. He does not scramble. He does not hedge. He moves through the world as though the world rearranged itself around him years ago and simply never stopped. I noticed that the first time I met him, 3 weeks ago at the architecture firm's anniversary gala, when he shook my hand and held it a half-second past the point where it was still appropriate, and said my name, Nadine, with a very specific wrongness, an emphasis on the second syllable that no one had ever used before, that made it sound like something he was trying, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. I had pulled my hand back and told myself it meant nothing. I had thought about it for 17 days. He was standing near the window when I walked in, a glass of something amber in his hand, talking to Celestine's husband with the particular ease of a man who is genuinely listening. That was the thing about Marcus that my curated internal filing system had not been adequately prepared for. He was present in a way that felt almost aggressive. His attention, when it landed on you, had weight. He looked up the moment I crossed the threshold. Not when Celestine greeted me, not when I laughed at something she said. The moment I stepped into the room, before I had even been announced as a social presence, his eyes were already there, dark, still, waiting. I looked away first. I always look away first with him, and I hate myself a little every time I do it. Dinner was the kind of exquisite torture that well-meaning people call conversation. We were 8 around the table. Marcus was directly across from me, which I was certain was Celestine's doing, and which I was absolutely not going to thank her for. He wore a deep charcoal suit that sat on his shoulders like it had been persuaded there by someone who understood the geometry of him. No tie, collar open, one button, the brown of his skin against the white of the fabric, doing something to the available light that I noticed and then refused to continue noticing. He barely spoke during the appetizers. Neither did I. And the silence between us, across 8 feet of candlelit mahogany, surrounded by 6 other people's animated voices, was the loudest thing in the room. Mia, Celestine's cousin, was telling a story about Legos that had everyone leaning in. Marcus smiled at something she said, a real smile, not a performance, and I watched the way it changed the architecture of his face and thought, I want to be the reason for that. The thought arrived without invitation and sat down like it owned the chair. I took a sip of wine and looked at the centerpiece. After dinner, the group migrated to the parlor in the loose, wine-warmed way of people who don't want the evening to end. I found a corner near the bookshelves, Celestine's books organized not alphabetically, but emotionally, which is the most Celestine thing in the world. And I was standing there reading spines and recalibrating my nervous system when I heard him. Not his voice, his presence, that specific displacement of air. You've been avoiding me all evening. I didn't turn around. I've been standing in a room with you for 3 hours. That's not the same thing, and you know it. I turned around then, because not turning would have been an admission, and I was not ready to admit anything. He was closer than I expected. Not inappropriately close. Nothing Marcus Ellington ever did was technically inappropriate, which was its own particular kind of maddening. But close enough that I could see the specific amber grain of his irises under the low lamplight. Close enough to smell him, something dark and clean, cedar maybe, and underneath it something warmer, skin warm, that my body registered before my brain could classify it. What do you want, Marcus? He tilted his head a fraction, considered me. What do you want, Nadine? I want to finish looking at Celestine's books. No, you don't. The certainty in it, not arrogant, not cruel, just certain, landed somewhere behind my sternum and spread outward. I thought, he shouldn't be allowed to be that sure of me. I thought, why is he that sure of me? I thought, is he right? He was right. You're angry with me, he said. Quieter now. The party sounds from the next room became a kind of curtain between us and everyone else. I barely know you. You've been angry with me since the gala. He studied me the way someone studies a problem they find genuinely interesting. Not angry at what I said, angry that I said it, and you haven't been able to stop thinking about it. My spine went rigid. You have a remarkable talent for deciding what's happening inside someone else's head. I'm not deciding. I'm watching. A beat. You do this thing when something unsettles you. You get very, very still. Like if you stop moving, the feeling won't catch you. The feeling had already caught me. It had caught me 17 days ago, and it had been sitting on my chest every night since, warm and heavy and entirely unwelcome. What did you bury? He asked. I stared at him. Excuse me? Everyone who gets that still has buried something. I'm not asking what it is. His voice dropped one register. I'm asking if you remember what it felt like before you did. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Not dramatically, just the way a boat shifts when someone steps off the dock. That sudden recalibration of what level means. I said, you don't get to ask me that. He said, I know. And then he said nothing else, just held the silence like a man who understood its specific gravity. Held it until it became something I could feel against my skin. Until the absence of his next words was louder than anything he could have said. Until I was standing in it, the way you stand in water. Aware of it on every surface of you, at once. I don't know why I did what I did next. I have turned it over 17 more times in the hours since, and I still cannot fully account for it. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was Celestine's pointed seating arrangement and the specific cruelty of candlelight and 11 years of carefully locked rooms all pressing at once against the same wall. Maybe it was the fact that he had looked at me, not at the version of Nadine Osei that I present to the world. The composed one, the directed one, the one who knows exactly what she's doing at every moment, but at whatever was underneath that. The unfinished thing. The version I haven't shown anyone. Maybe that's what did it. I reached out and I put my hand on his chest. Flat-palmed, deliberate. The heel of my hand against his sternum, my fingers spread. I felt his breath change. One full caught moment, and I felt his heartbeat, fast and real and completely unperformed beneath my palm. And something shifted behind his eyes that I had never seen on him before. Surprise. Genuine surprise. The kind that a man like Marcus Ellington could not have curated in advance. I had surprised him. I had surprised myself far more. I held my hand there for 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough to feel the heat of him come through the fabric of his shirt, long enough to know, in some non-verbal, cellular way that had nothing to do with thought, that this was not nothing, that I was not someone who did nothing things with my hands, that I had just told him something about myself that I had not yet told myself. Then I took my hand back. I remember, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, what it felt like before. His jaw moved. He didn't speak. I turned and walked back into the party, back into the warm noise and the wine and Mia's unfinished Lego story, and I stood there smiling at all the right moments, and I did not look at him for the rest of the evening, and every single nerve ending in my right hand remembered exactly where it had just been. It is 2 in the morning now. I am sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark, my right hand resting palm up in my lap, thinking about the look on his face. Not the heat of it, though there was heat, unmistakable and immediate. Not the power of it, though I had felt in those 4 seconds something clarify inside me that I have no language for yet. What I keep returning to is this: the way his composure cracked. Just that small fracture. Just that caught breath and that widening of his eyes. And the 1 second where Marcus Ellington, who moves through the world like it has already agreed with him, did not know what was about to happen next. I did that. I did that. I don't know what it means that I want to do it again. I don't know what it means that I fell asleep last night for the first time in weeks without lying awake cataloging all the ways a person can protect herself. I don't know what it means that the locked rooms inside me don't feel as sealed as they did this morning. But here's what I know. He is going to call tomorrow. And here's what I know that is more frightening than that. I am going to answer. Chapter 37. The Edge of Surrender. You don't get to decide what I can handle. My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated it. Hated the way it betrayed me. I was standing in the center of his study. His study. His kingdom. His carefully curated world of mahogany and shadow. And the nerve of me thinking I could hold ground in a room that had been built to make people feel small. Marcus didn't move from where he leaned against the desk. That was the thing about him that I still couldn't map. Another man would have paced. Another man would have raised his voice, matched my energy, given me something to push against. Marcus Caldwell gave me nothing. He just watched me with those dark, unhurried eyes and let me burn. I didn't say you couldn't handle it, he said. Quiet, almost gentle. I said you weren't ready. That's the same thing. No. He tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he was about to dismantle something I believed. It's not. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to put my hands on the nearest surface. The crystal decanter, the stack of legal briefs, anything, and send it to the floor just to hear the crash, just to make this room feel as disordered as the inside of my chest. I didn't, because the thing I kept circling out loud was that he might be right, and that terrified me more than any version of wrong. 3 weeks ago, I said, you handed me that contract. You said, look it over, take your time, nothing happens until you say yes. You said that, Marcus. I did. And then last night, he interrupted, still so composed I could scream. You were the one who walked into that room. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. He wasn't wrong. I had walked in. The room off the east corridor that I was never supposed to enter without explicit invitation. The room with the obsidian paneling and the single iron hook in the ceiling that I'd been pointedly not thinking about for 3 weeks. I had a glass of wine. I told myself I was only going to look. I'd stood in the center of that room for 11 minutes before he found me there. I knew it was 11 minutes because I'd counted. Because counting was the only thing keeping me from understanding why I wasn't leaving. That's not, I started. Zora, just my name. Nothing attached to it. But he said it the way he sometimes said it, with the second syllable held a half beat too long, like he was tasting it. And the effect moved through me from the base of my spine to somewhere behind my sternum. Don't do that, I said. Do what? Say my name like it's a point. Something shifted in his expression then. Not a smile exactly, but the architecture of one, the slight deepening of the lines at the corners of his mouth, the way his eyes warmed by precisely 1 degree. 1 degree. I was learning to measure in fractions with this man. Come here, he said. I didn't move. I stopped myself, recalibrated. I'm not doing that. I'm not walking towards you right now just because you asked. We're in the middle of something. We're always in the middle of something, Zora. He stood then, unfolding from the edge of the desk with that unhurried, deliberate grace that I had categorized in my mind as infuriating, because it was safer than what it actually was. He crossed the room slowly, not toward me, slightly to the left, to the low credenza beneath the window, where a dozen things sat arranged with intention. He picked up the silk ribbon. My chest did something involuntary. It was ivory, about 18 inches long, the kind used for binding documents or gift boxes. I'd noticed it in this room on my very first visit, 3 months ago, when he'd been reviewing the architectural plans for the Harlem Restoration Project, and I'd been there in my capacity as legal consultant. Nothing more, because that was what I was supposed to be. It had been sitting in a cut glass dish with paper clips and a letter opener, and I'd thought, odd thing to keep on a desk. I'd filed it away as an aesthetic quirk, a man who valued texture, elegance, detail. Now he was holding it between 2 fingers, letting it drape, and the sight of it in the amber-gray light of the study window made every hair on my forearms stand at attention. "This," he said, "has been here since the day you walked in and asked me whether the load-bearing columns in the West Wing were original or retrofitted. Do you remember that?" I remembered. "You touched it," he said. "You picked it up without thinking. You ran it through your fingers and set it down and kept talking about load-bearing columns." "I don't remember that." "I do." He held it out to me, flat across his palm, an offering, not a demand. I've been wondering what to do with that memory ever since. I looked at the ribbon. I looked at his hand, the specific dark mahogany of his skin, the long, careful fingers, the single scar along his right knuckle that I'd never asked about. I thought about walking out of this room. I took a detailed inventory of all the reasons that was the correct choice. And then I reached out and took the ribbon from his hand. The silk was warmer than I expected, his warmth still in it. I held it between my own fingers and felt something come loose behind my ribs, some catch or latch that I hadn't known was the only thing holding a particular door shut. "What are you afraid of?" he asked, soft. No judgment in it, which somehow made it worse. "I'm not afraid." My thumb moved along the silk without me deciding to move it. I could feel the fine weave, the almost imperceptible weight. I could smell his cologne, cedar, something darker underneath. And beneath that, the warm paper smell of the books that lined his walls. And beneath that, something that was just him, unmixed, the most unsettling part of any room he occupied. "I haven't decided anything," I said. My voice was almost steady. "I want you to be clear about that." "I'm clear," he said. "This doesn't mean Zora." He said it differently this time. Not a point, not a tactic. It was the gentlest version of my name I'd heard in his mouth, and it moved through me like the ribbon moved through my fingers, fluid, warm, already ahead of my conscious mind. "I know what this means and what it doesn't. You don't have to explain yourself to me." I stood there with his ribbon in my hands, and the last light of the afternoon on the side of my face, and I thought, the woman on the other side of this line. I thought about the 11 minutes in the room off the East Corridor. I thought about standing in the center of that space with the iron hook overhead, and the particular silence it held, and I thought about what I felt. Not fear, not exactly. Something more compound. Something with fear running through it the way iron runs through ore, structural, necessary, the thing that keeps the shape. I wanted to understand that feeling from the inside. I wasn't there yet. I knew I wasn't. But I was standing at the actual edge now, not the safe distance I'd been telling myself was close enough. And the ground under me was different here, thinner, charged, the way air feels before a storm that hasn't named itself yet. I leaned down. I placed the ribbon across his open hand, where I had found it. Closed his fingers around it. "Ask me again," I said, when I've stopped being afraid of the answer. I straightened and walked to the door, and I did not let myself look back, because I knew if I looked back, I would see him watching me with those dark, unhurried eyes, and I would not leave, and leaving was the only thing keeping tonight from being the night I stopped recognizing myself. What I didn't know, what I would understand much later, in the way you understand things that rearrange you, was that I had already crossed the line, not when I took the ribbon, not when I told him to sit. Chapter 38. Rebuilding Trust. I sent the text before I could talk myself out of it. Come over. We need to finish this. 7 words. No punctuation after the period except the kind that lives in the chest. The kind that compresses everything until breathing becomes a deliberate act. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stared at the grain of the marble like it might offer me something. An alternative. A way to unsay what I'd already said. It didn't. The thing about choices you cannot take back is that they reveal the shape of you, what you're willing to risk, what you've been pretending you don't want. I'd spent 4 days since the argument pretending very hard, pretending the silence between us was clean, rather than stretched to the point of tearing, pretending I wasn't listening for his voice in every ambient sound, pretending that what happened in that room was only a clash of 2 people who disagreed about something. It wasn't, and I knew that the moment I pressed send. He arrived in 40 minutes. Not rushing, I could tell by the measured sound of his knock. 3 even strikes, nothing urgent in it. Which meant he'd been thinking too. Which meant he'd waited some of those 40 minutes before leaving, deciding what version of himself to bring through my door. I opened it, and the first thing that hit me was the smell of him. Cedar and something underneath it. Something warmer and darker that I had never been able to name. He was wearing a gray Henley pushed to the elbows and dark slacks, and he looked like a man who had slept badly for 4 days and refused to let it show. And I recognized that because I had been doing the same thing. Naomi, he said. Just my name. But the way Marcus Ashford says my name when he means something by it is different from the way other people say it. Like he's holding it in his mouth for a half-second longer than necessary. Turning it over, making it specific to this moment, this version of me, right now. It does something to the back of my knees I am not going to examine. Come in, I said. I made coffee. He came in. He didn't touch me. We sat at opposite ends of the kitchen island with our mugs between us like neutral territory. The coffee was good. Ethiopian yirgacheffe I'd ground fresh. Because I needed something to do with my hands, and my hands needed to be doing something useful, rather than what they kept threatening to do, which was reach across the 3 feet of marble between us and touch him somewhere that would complicate everything. You said we needed to finish it, he said. We do. Where do you want to start? I looked at him directly. This was the thing about Marcus that had unsettled me from the very beginning. He gives you his full attention, like it's a room you can walk into, and once you're inside it, you realize there's nowhere to hide. Dark brown eyes, the color of good bourbon when the light catches it. A face that is precise rather than pretty. Strong jaw, broad nose, the kind of mouth that moves with intention. He was watching me the way he always watches me when he's decided to be patient. Like he has all the time there is, and I'm the most interesting thing in it. I hated that it still worked on me, even now. I want to start, I said, with the fact that I was scared. That night. Not of you. I need you to understand that. But of the whole thing. Of how much I stopped, reset. I'm not used to wanting things I don't have language for. Something moved through his expression. Not softness exactly, more like a door opening an inch. What does that mean, he asked. Careful, like he wanted to be sure he understood before he responded. It means that what we've been building, what I've been building, in my head around us, it's not organized. It doesn't fit into any category I had before you. And when it got loud in that room, when you pushed back and I pushed back harder, I wasn't fighting about the thing we said we were fighting about. I know, Marcus said. Neither was I. The quiet that fell between us was different from the quiet of the last 4 days. Denser, more honest. Tell me what you were actually fighting about, I said. He wrapped both hands around his mug. His hands, I noticed his hands more than I've admitted to myself. Wide palms, long fingers, the particular steadiness with which he holds things. Like everything he touches gets his full attention. I was fighting, he said, slowly, because you went still, in the middle of the conversation. You went somewhere inside yourself and you shut the door, and I didn't know how to reach you. And rather than say that, rather than admit I couldn't stand being locked out, I pushed, hard, the wrong way. I sat with that. I didn't know I went still, I said. You do it when something scares you. It's the opposite of what most people do. Most people get loud. You get very, very quiet, and your eyes go somewhere else. And whoever's in the room with you disappears. He'd been paying the kind of attention that requires caring, and he'd cataloged me without telling me. And something about that, the intimacy of being known without being asked, broke something open in my ribcage. Not pain, something more complicated than pain. That's, I started. Unsettling? The corner of his mouth moved. Good. We're even. You unsettle me constantly, and you do it without trying, which is somehow the most infuriating part. I don't mean to, I said. I know you don't. Marcus, I set my mug down. What are we doing? He didn't answer right away. He stood up from his stool, and the shift of his body in the space changed the room's gravity. He moved to the window, the one that faces east, where the city at night is a scatter of amber and white. And he stood with his back to me for a moment, looking out. And this was the reversal I hadn't anticipated. That man, who had walked through my door with everything controlled, who carried authority the way most men carry their phones, essential, always present, looked, for just that moment, uncertain. The power in the room shifted so quietly I almost missed it. Almost. I don't know, he said. His voice was lower. I know what I want. I've known what I want since the second week. The shape of it? That depends on what you're ready for. I got up from my stool. This part was not planned. My body made the decision before my mind caught up, which was itself information, the kind of information I had been trying not to collect. I crossed the kitchen, and I stopped beside him at the window. Not in front of him, not touching him, just beside. So we were both looking at the city, and the city wasn't looking back. Show me, I said, what you want. The silence stretched exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned to face me, and he raised one hand and placed it against the side of my face. Not a caress, not tentative. His palm against my jaw, his thumb at the edge of my cheekbone, holding me still. And he looked at me with the full weight of that attention, the kind that feels like a question and an answer simultaneously. You're not ready, he said. But he didn't move his hand. You don't get to decide that. I'm not deciding, I'm observing. His thumb moved, barely, just a fraction, tracing the bone beneath my eye like he was memorizing the architecture. Your breathing changed the moment I stood up. You've been watching my hands for the last 20 minutes. He paused. You're not unready, Naomi. You're terrified of what ready looks like. My throat closed around whatever response I'd been forming, because he was right. And the fact that he was right, the fact that he had read me that precisely, that he'd seen what I'd worked so hard to hide, should have made me pull back. Should have felt like exposure, like the bad kind of naked. Instead, what happened was this: a wave of heat that started somewhere around the base of my spine and moved upward with the slow certainty of tide coming in. And I became acutely, almost painfully aware of every point of contact between his skin and mine. The warmth of his palm, the specific pressure of his thumb, the inch of air between the rest of him and the rest of me, which suddenly felt less like distance and more like anticipation made physical. I don't know how to want things this much, I said, and it came out stripped bare, nothing left to hide it. It's never been like, I don't have a framework for this. He made a sound low in his throat, not quite words. Good, he said, and his voice had dropped into something that resonated in my chest. Frameworks are for things you've already mapped. You don't map this, Naomi. You move through it. His other hand came up, and he cupped my face in both palms. And this was the moment the ground shifted beneath me, not metaphorically but physically. my body reorganizing itself around this new fact that being held still by someone could feel like freedom, that surrender wasn't the diminishment I'd always assumed, that the reason I'd been so desperate to maintain control in every room, every conversation, every version of my own life was because I'd never been given this specific, witnessed, intentional stillness. He pressed his forehead to mine, didn't kiss me, just touched my forehead with his, stayed there. I closed my eyes, and I felt myself want him in a way that had nothing to do with anything I'd wanted before. Not the familiar hunger I understood, not attraction reduced to its simplest terms. This was something compound. His hands on my face, and his forehead against mine, and his breathing and the cedar and darker smell of him, and underneath all of it, this devastating awareness that he had been patient with me in ways I hadn't deserved and hadn't asked for, and that somewhere in the architecture of that patience, I had been quietly, irrevocably changed. He kissed me once. Slow. A single press of his mouth to mine that lasted long enough to make a promise and ended before I could process it. Then he stepped back, hands falling away. "Sit down with me," he said. His voice was rough at the edges now. "We still have things to say." I looked at him, at the steadiness he was working to maintain, the way his chest moved with the deliberate rhythm of a man reining something in. He was still the one who'd walked through the door with all the control. And somehow, standing here with my pulse crashing and my breath undone, I understood that I was the one who held it now. I had no idea what to do with that. I sat down, and he looked at me across the kitchen island, like a man who has just told the most dangerous truth of his life, and is waiting to see if the world will hold. "Marcus," I said quietly. "Yeah, I'm not going anywhere." His expression broke open. "Just for a second, just enough." "Good," he said, "because what I need to tell you next, you're going to want to be sitting down." #control and liberation. You don't get to rewrite the terms after I've already agreed to them. My voice comes out steadier than I feel, which is a small mercy, because the rest of me is approximately 1 degree of Fahrenheit away from complete structural failure. "That's not how contracts work, Marcus. That's not how anything works." He turns from the window. The city behind him is 43 floors of compressed light and ambition, and somehow he still manages to be the most overwhelming thing in the room. "I'm not rewriting terms," he says. "I'm clarifying intent." Clarifying. I stop, breathe, because if I finish that sentence at the volume it wants to be finished at, I'll say something I mean too much to take back. "You told me this weekend was mine to set the pace." Your exact words. And now you're standing there telling me the room is already prepared, the protocols are already established, and I just need to, what? Walk in and surrender on your schedule? Yes. The simplicity of it lands like a slap. I have been in his orbit for 4 months. I know his silences better than I know some people's speeches. I know the particular quality of quiet that means he is waiting for me to catch up to something he has already decided. And I have spent all 4 of those months telling myself I find it infuriating. Tonight, with the low amber light catching the exact warm brown undertones of his skin, his locks pulled back in a way that makes the angles of his face do something to the back of my knees. Tonight, infuriating is a lie I can no longer afford. "I need you to hear what I'm saying," I tell him, "because this is important. This is the thing that matters. Not just wait for me to stop talking." Something shifts in his expression. Not softening. Marcus Aurelius Beaumont does not soften. It's more like precision. He gives me his full attention, the way a high-powered lens gives a subject its full resolution, and suddenly I am very aware that I am the subject. "I'm listening," he says. "I'm scared." The words come out smaller than I intended. Not weak, just honest, in the way that honesty is sometimes indistinguishable from exposure. He crosses the room. Not fast. Not like he's crossing to stop me from feeling what I'm feeling. He moves the way he does everything, with deliberate, unhurried certainty, as if the space between us is territory he has already mapped, and he is simply arriving at the coordinates he identified an hour ago. He stops close enough that I can smell the cedar and black pepper of him. Close enough to be a decision. I know, he says. That doesn't. I press my teeth together. That is not a comforting response, Marcus. I'm not trying to comfort you. His voice drops to a register that I feel somewhere between my shoulder blades. Comfortable isn't what tonight is for. And then, God help me. He smiles. Just barely. Just enough that the corner of his mouth lifts, and he says, with the absolute straight-faced delivery of a man who knows exactly what he's doing. Although if you'd prefer, I could have Denise bring up the charcuterie board and we could sit on opposite ends of the couch and discuss our feelings about the macroeconomic implications of interest rate volatility. I stare at him. He holds the expression, that deadpan, beautiful, ridiculous expression, for exactly 3 seconds. Then I laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere you didn't know was clenched until it releases. That kind of helpless, unwilling laugh that feels like something giving way inside your chest. I laugh, and I press my hand over my mouth to stop it, and it doesn't stop. And he watches me with something on his face that I am not ready to name yet. You are unhinged, I tell him, when I can breathe again. And yet, he tilts his head. Still the most interesting thing in your life. He's not wrong. That's the problem. That has always been the problem. He reaches up then, and this is where the ground begins to move, and he touches my face. Just his fingertips at my jaw. Just the specific, particular heat of his skin against mine. The rough, smooth texture of a man who works with his hands when his hands aren't running a real estate empire. He doesn't pull me toward him. He doesn't direct me anywhere. He just holds that contact like it means something specific, and looks at me like he is reading a language I didn't know I was writing. Tell me what you're scared of, he says. The real thing, not the version you've been rehearsing in the car on the way over. The real thing. I think about lying. The reflex is automatic. I have been managing my own exposure since I was 17 years old, making myself only as legible as was strategically useful. And Marcus Beaumont is the most powerful man I have ever stood this close to. And everything in my survival architecture says minimize, control, deflect. But his thumb traces the edge of my jaw. Just once. Just that small, specific movement. And my body does something I do not have language for. It starts from where his skin meets mine, and it moves, not outward the way heat usually moves, but inward. Like it's looking for something to fill. Like it's searching for the specific shape of an absence I've been carrying so long I stopped registering the weight. My breath changes. Not dramatically, not the gasping cinematic way. Just, my next inhale is shorter than it should be. And it comes with an awareness of my own chest, my own sternum, my own body as a thing that is responding to this man in ways I have not authorized. That's the thing about desire when it first finds you where you actually live. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you time to put on armor. It just moves through the architecture of you, like it already knows the floor plan. I'm scared that you actually know what you're doing, I say. With me, that this isn't, that you see more than I've shown you, and that you're going to use it, he finishes. Yes, he doesn't flinch. He doesn't reassure me with the soft, palatable answer. He says, I am going to use it. Everything you give me tonight, Naomi, I'm going to use all of it. And then, before I can process that, before I can find my footing, that's what you actually want. Don't tell me what I want. I'm not telling you. His eyes don't leave mine. I'm confirming it. You already know. The thing is, he's right. And the knowing of it, the actual physical recognition of it, moving through me, the way my body simply agrees with him in a way my brain hasn't caught up to yet. That is the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me in a room without visible threat. I have run a department of 32 people. I have sat across from boards of directors and not blinked. I have held myself together through funerals and failures and the specific humiliation of loving people who were only passing through. I have never lost the thread of myself in any room I've walked into. Standing here in the low amber light, with Marcus Aurelius Beaumont's hand at my jaw, and his certainty like a gravitational field I am already inside of, I cannot locate the thread. And the extraordinary, terrifying thing is that I don't want to. Not right now. Not with him. If I walk into that room, I say, I stop, collect myself. I need you to understand that this is not. The sentence doesn't have an ending I can say out loud yet, so I try a different door. I've never trusted anyone enough. Something moves across his face. Something real. Something that isn't dominance or certainty or any of the things he wears like tailored armor. Something that looks like it costs him to have it be visible. I know that, he says quietly. How? Because you came back. His thumb stills at my jaw. 3 times, Naomi. Every time you had a reason to walk away, you didn't walk away. A beat. That's not strategy. That's not professional assessment. You came back because something in you already made this choice, and you've been waiting for yourself to catch up. I want to argue with him. I want to find the seam in that logic and pull it apart, because that is what I do. That is the machinery I built myself into. That is how I have survived every room that wanted to diminish me. But my body is still doing that thing. That quiet, devastating interior thing. The warmth that keeps moving inward instead of out. The specific tightness across my collarbones that I now understand, standing here in this room, is not anxiety. It is anticipation. It is want. Specific, honest, undefendable want, not for the idea of him, not for what he represents, not for the carefully curated version of desire I might have described to myself in the abstract. For him. For this man specifically standing this close, who just told me he would use everything I give him, and somehow made it sound like a promise instead of a warning. If I do this, I say, and I hear even as I say it, that the conditional is already a formality. If I trust you with this, I won't waste it. His voice is low and certain, and there is nothing performative about it. No theater, no seduction tactic. Just a man saying a true thing. And when you need it back, I'll give it back. All of it. Better than I found it. The ground keeps moving. I am 31 years old. I have a graduate degree and a 401k and 11 houseplants whose names I know. I have been competent and careful and self-sufficient since the age of 17, and I have never, not once, let anyone this far inside the perimeter without a clear exit strategy already mapped. I don't have an exit strategy right now. What I have is his hand at my jaw and this new, specific, unnamed heat moving through me like something being discovered for the first time. Not invented, but found. The way you find a room in a house you've lived in for years and suddenly understand why none of the furniture ever felt quite right anywhere else. Okay, I say, just that, just the one word. He studies my face for a long moment, and in that moment, he is not the man who commands rooms or moves markets. He is just a man, looking at me like I am the most consequential thing he has ever been careful with. Then his hand drops from my jaw. He takes one step back. The room is through the second door on the left, he says. And his voice is exactly what it was before, except for the one undercurrent that I now hear clearly. The current that says, I have been waiting for you to get here. Take as long as you need in the hall. He turns back to the window. I look at his back, the exact width of his shoulders, the way his locks fall between his shoulder blades. The stillness of a man exercising a restraint that is costing him something. And I feel the full, specific, irrevocable weight of the choice I have just made. Then I walk toward the second door on the left, and I don't stop. I do not look back, and somehow that is the moment I understand that everything I thought I was protecting myself from was never the danger. The danger was always how much I would want to walk forward. Chapter 40. Embracing Shadows. He was drawing. I didn't know that about him. 40 chapters into whatever this is between us, and I didn't know that Marcus Ellison drew. Not blueprints, not architectural schematics, Not the precise and calculated lines that built his empire, but this freehand, a charcoal stick, moving across heavy cream paper with a kind of quiet ferocity I had never seen from him before. Like something alive was trying to get out through his hands. I stopped in the doorway of his study. He hadn't heard me come in. That almost never happens. Marcus notices everything. He noticed the first time I wore my hair loose instead of pinned. Noticed the exact moment 3 weeks ago when I stopped flinching when he spoke my name. He notices everything. And the fact that he didn't notice me standing here felt like I'd been handed something rare and breakable without warning. His head was bent. The lamp on his desk threw amber light across his shoulders, across the side of his face, and I could see the line of his jaw working slightly. This small, involuntary thing he does when he's concentrating. A kind of micro-tension in the muscle below his ear. The charcoal moved, stopped, moved again in a long, sure stroke. I looked at the paper. He was drawing a woman, not in a lewd way, not in any way I had a ready framework for. She was seated, her back to whoever was looking at her, her neck bent forward, as though she was reading or listening to something just below the frame. Her shoulders, he'd spent real time on her shoulders. I could see the layering of shadow there, the careful way the charcoal built depth, were bare, and there was something about the set of them, the particular angle of exhaustion and dignity combined, that made my throat tighten. I recognized those shoulders. They were mine. "You can come in, Naomi." His voice was low, not startled, just low and certain, and he still didn't look up from the paper. "You knew I was there. I knew before you reached the door." He set the charcoal down, and when he finally looked at me, his eyes were darker than usual. Not angry, just full, like a room where every surface held something worth examining. "You always pause on the third step from the top. The wood sounds different there. You pause for exactly 3 seconds before you decide to keep coming." I didn't say anything. Tonight you paused for 7. The heat that moved through me started at the base of my neck and traveled inward, not outward, which was new. Usually warmth lives on the surface of my skin around him, something I can account for and manage. This went somewhere deeper, somewhere I hadn't offered him access to. "May I look at it?" I asked. He turned the paper toward me without answering. She was me, unmistakably, the particular slope of my shoulders, the way my natural hair sits when I've worn it pinned all day, and then unpinned it, and it's half collapsed, half reaching. He'd captured that. He'd captured the small scar at the back of my left shoulder I'd gotten at 12 years old, falling from a mango tree at my grandmother's house in Savannah. A detail so small I couldn't remember ever mentioning it, and yet there it was in charcoal, this tiny imperfect mark that I had spent years learning not to notice. "You drew my scar," I said. My voice came out wrong, not broken, just stripped of its usual armor. "It's beautiful," he said. Simple, final, like he was stating the time of day. "Marcus, do you want to tell me why you came to find me at 11:30 at night, or do you want to stand in the doorway and make a case for leaving?" That was the thing about him. The version of Marcus who had spent the last 6 weeks being almost impossibly patient with me, who had explained the terms of what he wanted between us with a care and a deliberateness that had undone my every prepared objection. That version never fully disappeared. But he shared space with this one, the one who asked questions that weren't questions, the one who looked at me like the answer was already known and he was just giving me the courtesy of arriving at it myself. "I found the box," I said. Silence. Not uncomfortable silence. There was nothing uncomfortable about the way Marcus occupied space. It was the silence of someone who has been expecting a door to open and is simply waiting to see who walks through. "Which box?" he said. "The one in the bottom drawer behind the Williams contracts." I paused. "The velvet one." He had shown me this study in early October, 2 months ago when I was still interviewing for the position, and he was still performing the role of man who needed an executive curator for his private art collection. Which he did need. Which I genuinely was. But there had been a moment during that first tour when he'd opened the bottom drawer of the antique writing desk to show me the original deed documents for the Ellison Foundation. And I had seen, pushed to the back, a small square box covered in deep burgundy velvet. I hadn't asked. I was too professional then. Too certain of the terms of my presence in his world. I'd catalogued it in the back of my mind the way you catalog something you don't have language for yet. Filed it under later, or never, or not your business, Naomi. Tonight I'd come in to retrieve a portfolio document he'd asked me to have ready by morning. I'd opened the drawer, and the velvet was right there. And my hand had moved before I made the decision to let it. I had opened it. "Tell me what you felt," he said, "when you saw what was inside." I wanted to tell him that was an inappropriate question. I had a whole speech prepared in the 7 seconds I'd stood on that third step. Something professional and measured, about boundaries and the terms of the role I occupied in his life, which was still not fully defined, and had been not fully defined in ways that kept me awake at 3 a.m. with my hands pressed flat against my sternum, like I was trying to hold something in. But he was looking at me the way he'd drawn me. Like my scar was beautiful. Like the imperfect things were the ones worth rendering. I stopped. Started again. I didn't know what I was feeling. That's actually the most honest answer I can give you. Try less honest, he said. See if it gets us somewhere. I almost laughed. Almost. The sound dissolved before it reached air. Curious, I said. The silk. I stopped again because saying it out loud in this amber-lit room with charcoal dust on his fingers was different from thinking it alone in the dark hallway. In the lamplight, it looked like the inside of something cosmic, not decorative, not theatrical, serious. The leather cuffs beside it were butter-soft and lined with the same silk, with small brass closures that I now understood were designed to be undone instantly from either direction. The release mechanism, he said, without me asking. They open in under 2 seconds, always, no matter what. You're explaining them. I'm always going to explain them. He looked at me steadily. The cuffs are about focus, not imprisonment. The blindfold is about trust. What happens inside that trust is built entirely by you. I am only ever as far as your breath. Something happened in my chest that I'm not going to call tenderness, because that word is too small and too safe, and what I felt was neither. I don't know how to do this, I said. You don't have to know how. He closed the box, set it down, and then he did something I was not prepared for. He lifted his hand, slowly, and touched the back of my left shoulder, exactly where the scar was. One finger, charcoal dusted. A touch so light it barely qualified as pressure. This is all I'm asking tonight, he said, that you stop pretending you don't already know what you want. The ground moved. I am not speaking metaphorically. Something beneath the reliable surface of who I had been for 31 years shifted in a way I felt in the architecture of my hips, the backs of my knees, the particular ache behind my sternum that had been building since October and had no name and did not need one. I reached out and picked up the indigo blindfold. It was heavier than I expected. I stood there holding it in both hands like an offering or a question, and I understood, for the first time, in my body, in the specific nerve-lit geography of my skin, that the reason I had come down that hallway tonight had nothing to do with the portfolio. I had come to find him. I had come because I wanted to stop being someone who pauses on the third step. Marcus watched me, didn't move, didn't reach for it, waited, and in the waiting I found something I hadn't known I'd lost, the part of myself that was capable of choosing what frightened her. Show me, I said, what the focus feels like. He took the blindfold from my hands, and when his fingers closed over mine, before releasing it, the charcoal left a faint, dark mark across my palm. His mark, specific and accidental, already part of me before I'd agreed to anything. I closed my fingers around it. Before we begin, he said softly, setting the silk against his forearm, watching my face with that full, careful attention that had always seemed too much, You should know that I drew you 3 weeks before you found the box. The room tilted. 3 weeks. The morning after you told me about the mango tree, he said. About falling. I stared at him. I needed to understand, he said quietly, why I was already afraid of losing something I hadn't yet been given. The blindfold lay across his arm like a question I was finally ready to answer, and the mark he'd left on my palm was already fading. And I understood with a clarity that felt like falling that the real thing he'd been drawing for 3 weeks was not my shoulders. It was this moment. And I was standing in it, and I was not turning back. And somewhere deep beneath every careful thing I had built myself into, something that had been sleeping for 31 years opened its eyes and looked. Chapter 41. The First Dungeon Experience. My mother used to say that a woman who doesn't know what she wants is dangerous to herself. I was 9 years old the first time I heard her say it. Standing at the kitchen window, watching her cut herbs from the clay pots she kept on the sill. Basil, thyme, something purple I never learned the name of. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the window, or to herself, or to some version of a woman she had once been and was trying to forget. Her hands never stopped moving. That was the thing about her. She was always doing something with her hands, so she didn't have to feel what was in them. I think about that now, standing in a corridor that smells of cedar and dark leather and something warm I can't identify. Watching Marcus Holt sign his name at a registration desk like he is checking into a hotel. Like this is any evening. Like I am not standing 6 inches behind him, with my pulse doing something I have no language for yet. Something that starts in my wrists and moves upward, slow as a tide. I don't know what I want, which means, by my mother's logic, I am dangerous. The place is called Obsidian. I'd expected something seedier. Some part of me, the part that was raised on church pews in Silver Spring, Maryland, and read the Spellman Messenger cover to cover every semester, had constructed an image. Dim, sad, faintly criminal. A place where people were diminished by their own hunger. What I find instead is a building that used to be a Gilded Age private club, and it still remembers what it was. High ceilings crossed with original ironwork. Walls the color of deep burgundy that seems almost alive in the low amber lighting. The entry attendant, a woman in a pressed black blazer who speaks with the measured tone of someone accustomed to calibrating people's fear, hands us a small booklet. House rules, code of conduct, a glossary. Your first time with us? She asks. Yes, Marcus says. She looks at me, not at both of us, at me, specifically, like she's reading something I haven't posted. The observation lounge is a good place to start, she says. No participation required. It can be a lot the first time, or not enough. A pause that is almost a smile. Depends on the person. I open the booklet on the way through the second door. Safe words must be established before any scene begins. No means no. Yellow means slow. Red means stop. Full and absolute and no questions asked. The language is precise, careful, almost bureaucratic, and I find to my genuine surprise that the precision does not make it cold. It makes it feel like architecture, like a house someone built to be livable. Marcus holds the door. His hand does not touch the small of my back. He hasn't touched me at all since we arrived. That is the thing I cannot stop noticing, the specific, deliberate quality of his not touching. The observation lounge is a long room with low curved booths, the kind designed to orient your gaze toward the open floor beyond the glass partition. It's busy without being loud. Couples mostly, and a handful of solo observers who sit with a posture that suggests they know exactly what they're doing, and they have no interest in explaining it to anyone. The demographic variety is something I wasn't prepared for either. Every age, every body, every shade. A black woman in a structured copper-colored wrap dress is having a quiet, fierce conversation with a man in a white button-down who keeps nodding with this expression of someone being remade. I watch them for too long. Marcus orders 2 drinks at the curved bar without asking me what I want. He brings me something with blackberries and dark rum that is sharp on the first sip and then immediately smooth. And I realize, as I swallow, that he knew I needed something that would bite before it settled. You're quiet, he says. I'm always quiet. You're quiet differently tonight. He is wearing a jacket the color of midnight, not black, darker than black, that specific non-color that exists only in the space where light gives up. And he is sitting at a 45-degree angle to me in the booth, which means I can see his profile without him having to watch me watching him. This is either courtesy or strategy. With Marcus, I have learned it is always both. I don't answer him. I look through the glass partition instead. On the other side, a scene is being set. A woman standing very still in the center of the lit space, her arms raised, wrists loosely bound to a suspension point above her with something that looks like silk rope in a deep blue-green. She is barefoot. Her expression is not what I expected, not fearful, not performed. She looks like someone who has just set down something extraordinarily heavy. The man moving around her is methodical in the way of someone who learned to be careful with beautiful things. He checks every knot. He asks something and she nods, and the nod has weight to it. Not submission, but agreement. The nod of a woman who is exactly where she chose to be. The ground shifts. I feel it happen, that specific reorganization of something in my interior that I have no category for. It's not arousal exactly, or not only. It's more like watching someone speak a language I was told didn't exist and realizing I've been dreaming in it for years. She's in control, I say. I don't mean to say it aloud. She's absolutely in control, Marcus says. No inflection, just a fact delivered with the confidence of someone who has known it longer than I have. I stop. The silence between us opens up. It's not empty. It's a room with furniture in it. He waits. He is very good at waiting. It is one of the most unnerving things about him. The patience of a man who knows what he wants and has decided that the waiting is part of the wanting. I thought it was about, I start again. Giving something up, he says. Yes, it isn't. He turns his head then, and I am looking at him directly, which I was trying not to do. His eyes are very dark, the brown of soil after rain, and there is something in them tonight that I have seen only once before, on the evening we first talked, truly talked, when he sat across from me in that too-quiet restaurant and said, "What are you actually afraid of?" And I lied and said nothing, and he nodded like the lie was also an answer. The surrender, he says, is how she holds everything. The rope is so she doesn't have to hold it with her hands. My drink is cold in my palm. The music in the room is low, something without lyrics, something that lives in the bass range.